Hey guys, tonight we begin with a little time travel, back to an era of jazz, rebellion, and clandestine cocktails. It's a trip into the heart of the roaring 20s, so before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. The second thing is the music. It's not a polite orchestra, it's a live jazz band crammed into a corner. A saxophone wails, a trumpet growls, and the piano player's hands fly across the keys. It's loud, energetic, and intoxicating. The story of Heidi Lamar also shines a light on the often hidden contributions of women in science and technology. For centuries, the work of female scientists, engineers, and mathematicians was often ignored, dismissed, or credited to their male colleagues. Heidi's case is a particularly stark example because her public persona was so overwhelmingly focused on her beauty. The world had put her in a box, and it was a box that had no room for a brilliant inventor. Her story, once it came to light, became a powerful part of a broader effort to rediscover and celebrate these hidden figures of history. It challenges us to look again at the past and ask who else's contributions have been forgotten or erased, simply because they did not fit the stereotype of who is supposed to be an innovator. Let us descend again into the London Underground and consider the sheer psychological impact of its creation. For the first time in human history, a significant portion of a city's population was voluntarily traveling underground in a machine. This was a profound shift in the human relationship with the environment. The Victorians were conquering not just distant lands, but the very earth beneath their feet. There was an element of bravery required from the first passengers, a trust in the new technology and the engineers who built it. They had to overcome a primal fear of the dark, of enclosed spaces, and of the unknown that lurked beneath the familiar city streets. The success of the underground was a triumph of public confidence, as much as it was a triumph of engineering. The social engineering aspect of the early underground, championed by Charles Pearson, is also a crucial part of its story. The vision was explicitly utopian. By building affordable and rapid transit to the outskirts of the city, planners hoped to solve the public health crisis of the Victorian slums. They believed they could create a new kind of city, where workers could live in green, healthy suburbs and commute to the industrial center. This idea that transport infrastructure can shape society for the better was revolutionary. The underground was one of the first and most successful examples of large-scale, transit-oriented development. It didn't just move people. It actively shaped the physical and social geography of London, creating the sprawling metropolis we know today. The branding and design of the underground created a sense of coherence and safety in what could have been a confusing and intimidating environment. Imagine navigating a complex, multi-line system with no clear signage, no consistent station design, and no clear map. It would be a nightmare. The unified design language, the roundel, the Johnston font, the Beck map, was a triumph of user-centered design long before that term even existed. It created a feeling of order, predictability, and safety. It reassured passengers that they were in a single, well-managed system, even as they transferred between lines built by different, once-competing companies. This powerful branding turned a collection of tunnels into a trusted public service. And now, let's follow the coffee bean into the cafes of Paris. The Parisian café, like the English coffee house, became a hotbed of intellectual and artistic life. It was the preferred haunt of the philosophies of the Enlightenment, like Voltaire and Rousseau, who would spend their days in debate over cups of coffee. Later, in the 19th and 20th centuries, the cafés of Montparnasse and Saint-Germain-des-Prés became the living rooms of the artistic and literary avant-garde. Writers like Ernest Hemingway and F. Scott Fitzgerald, artists like Pablo Picasso, and existentialist philosophers like Jean-Paul Sartre and Simone de Beauvoir all did some of their most famous work while sitting at a small café table. The café was a place to see and be seen, to work, to argue, and to watch the world go by. The Viennese coffee house, or Kaffeehaus, developed its own unique and elegant culture. Declared an intangible cultural heritage by UNESCO, the Viennese coffee house is an institution. It is characterized by a specific atmosphere: marble tabletops, thonet chairs, plush upholstered benches, and formally dressed waiters. A key part of the tradition is that when you order a single coffee, you are entitled to sit for hours, undisturbed, reading the selection of international newspapers that are always provided. It is considered an extended living room, a place for contemplation and quiet conversation. This culture, which blossomed in the late 19th century, was central to the intellectual life of Vienna, with figures like Sigmund Freud and Leon Trotsky being regular patrons. The story of coffee also has its darker chapters, particularly its deep connection to the transatlantic slave trade. As demand for coffee, sugar, and cotton boomed in Europe, the colonial powers established vast plantation economies in the Americas and the Caribbean. These plantations were built on the brutal exploitation of enslaved Africans, who were forced to endure horrific conditions to cultivate and harvest these cash crops. Brazil, which became the world's largest coffee producer in the 19th century, was also the last country in the Western world to abolish slavery in 1888. The wealth that built the elegant coffee houses of Europe was generated, in large part, by the unpaid and inhuman labor of millions. It's a sobering and essential part of coffee's history that should not be forgotten. The environmental impact of coffee cultivation is another complex part of its story. Traditionally, coffee was grown in the shade, beneath the canopy of native trees. This method supported biodiversity and maintained healthy soil. However, in the 20th century, to increase yields, new, sun-grown varieties of coffee were developed. This led to widespread deforestation as farmers cleared land to grow coffee in dense, monoculture plantations. This practice has had significant negative consequences, including soil erosion, water pollution from pesticides and fertilizers, and loss of habitat for birds and other wildlife. In recent years, there has been a growing movement to promote a return to sustainable, shade-grown coffee, a practice that is better for the environment and often produces higher quality beans. And now, as our journey through these stories begins to wind down, let's take one last, lingering look at each of them. Let's start with the image of the emus, victorious on the plains of Western Australia. Their story is a perfect little palate cleanser in the grand, often heavy, meal of history. It reminds us that the past is not always a procession of solemn events. It is also filled with glorious absurdity, with moments that defy easy explanation and invite a gentle, knowing laugh. The emus stand as a furry, feathered monument to the idea that sometimes the most sophisticated systems can be undone by simple, chaotic, beautiful life. They are a reminder to not take ourselves or our grand plans too seriously. Let us then picture Heidi Lamar in her Hollywood trailer between takes of a glamorous film. She is not studying her lines or reading fan mail. She is sketching, thinking, tinkering. She is solving a problem that the world's top naval engineers are struggling with. This image is a powerful symbol of hidden potential, of the worlds that can exist inside a person, unknown to those who only see the surface. Her story urges us to look deeper, to question our assumptions, and to celebrate the multifaceted nature of human intelligence. She was a woman who was simultaneously a creation of the Hollywood dream factory and a brilliant mind who helped build the invisible architecture of our modern age. Her legacy is one of quiet, profound, and ultimately undeniable genius. You find a small, wobbly table. The crowd is a fascinating mix. You see elegantly dressed couples, writers, artists, gangsters in sharp suits, and fellow rebels like yourself, all united by a shared secret and a thirst for something a little stronger than soda pop. Now let's imagine ourselves standing on a platform deep beneath the streets of London. We hear the rumble of an approaching train, a sound that has echoed through these tunnels for over a century. We are part of a long continuum of travelers, a daily migration that is the lifeblood of the city. The tube is a story of human ambition on a colossal scale, a testament to our ability to reshape our environment to meet our needs. It is a story of grit, of ingenuity, and of community. From the Victorian navvies digging in the mud to the wartime Londoners sheltering from the bombs, the underground is a symbol of the city's enduring spirit. It is a reminder that some of the greatest achievements of humanity are the ones we use every day, the systems that work so well we barely notice them. And finally, let's savor the aroma of coffee. It's a scent that has wafted through Sufi monasteries, Ottoman coffee houses, Parisian cafes, and modern kitchens. It is the smell of wakefulness, of conversation, of ideas. The journey of this one small bean is a story of the interconnectedness of our world. It's a story that touches on exploration, trade, empire, revolution, and art. It shows how a simple agricultural product can become a powerful cultural force, shaping societies and daily rituals across the globe. It is a comforting reminder that even the most mundane parts of our lives are steeped in a rich and fascinating history, a history that connects us to people, places, and events far beyond our own experience. The common thread that runs through all these stories is one of unexpected outcomes and hidden depths. The Australian military expected a swift victory, but found a humbling defeat. The world saw a beautiful actress, but missed a brilliant inventor. The Victorians dug a dirty, smoky tunnel that became a beloved symbol of a world-class city. A bitter, foreign drink became the fuel for intellectual awakenings and a global cultural phenomenon. History is rarely a straight line. It is a messy, surprising, and often ironic process. It is full of twists and turns, of failures that lead to success, and of small, overlooked things that end up changing the world. These stories are a gentle reminder of that beautiful complexity. Let's consider the nature of warfare itself through the lens of the Emu conflict. Conventional warfare is predicated on the idea of a clear enemy with predictable behaviors and structures. The Emus presented an unconventional threat. They had no supply lines to cut, no command center to destroy, and no morale to break. They were a force of nature, operating on instinct. This is a challenge that modern armies have faced time and again when confronting insurgencies or guerrilla forces. The Great Emu War, in its own absurd way, was a miniature preview of the difficulties of fighting a foe that doesn't adhere to the established rules of engagement. It's a lesson that military strategists have had to learn and relearn throughout history, often at great cost. The tale also speaks to the relationship between humanity and the animal kingdom. For much of our history, we have seen ourselves as separate from and superior to nature, as its rightful masters. The Great Emu War is a comical but pointed rebuttal of that idea. It shows nature as an active, resilient force that cannot be easily tamed or controlled. The emus were not a passive backdrop to a human drama. They were the protagonists of their own story, defending their access to resources and outsmarting their would-be conquerors. It's a story that encourages a little more humility in our dealings with the natural world, a recognition that we are not always as in charge as we like to think we are. Thinking again about Hedy Lamarr's escape from her controlling husband, Friedrich Mandel, this was not just a personal act of liberation. It was also an act with historical consequences. By escaping, she not only freed herself, but also carried with her a wealth of knowledge about the cutting edge of European military technology. Had she remained his trophy wife, her insights and her inventive mind would likely have been lost forever. Or worse, her knowledge could have been used to benefit the Axis powers. Her escape was a pivotal moment, a what-if of history. It set her on the path to Hollywood, and, ultimately, to the collaboration with George Antheil that would lead to their world-changing invention. It was a personal decision that had an unforeseen and profound impact on the future of technology. The contrast between Hedy Lamarr and her public image is also a commentary on the nature of celebrity. The Hollywood studio system of the Golden Age was incredibly effective at creating and controlling public personas. Stars were often reduced to a single, marketable trait: the girl next door, the tough guy, the exotic beauty. Heidi was a victim of this system's success. It crafted an image for her that was so powerful and so one-dimensional that it eclipsed her true self. Her story is a powerful critique of a culture that often values appearance over substance and that struggles to accept complexity in its public figures, especially its female ones. She was a person of immense depth who was forced to live in a world that only valued her surface. Let's consider the materials of the London Underground. The story of the Tube is a story of iron, clay, and electricity. The cast iron rings that line the deep-level tunnels are a testament to the industrial might of Victorian Britain. They were manufactured in foundries and painstakingly bolted together by workers in cramped, pressurized conditions deep underground. The London clay, a soft, plastic, and waterproof soil, was both a blessing and a curse. It was easy to tunnel through, which made the deep-level tubes possible, but it was also unstable and required the immediate installation of the iron lining to prevent collapse. And electricity, the clean, modern power source, was the magic ingredient that made the deep-level system viable, freeing the tunnels from the smoke and soot of the steam age. The naming of the tube lines is a small but charming piece of its history. Some are straightforwardly geographical, like the Victoria Line, which runs under Victoria Street, or the Bakerloo Line, a portmanteau of Baker Street and Waterloo, its original termini. Others have more historical roots. The Jubilee Line was originally going to be called the Fleet Line, after the subterranean river fleet, but it was renamed in 1977 to commemorate Queen Elizabeth II's Silver Jubilee. The Metropolitan Line is of course named after the original company, the Metropolitan Railway. These names are a kind of verbal map of the city's history and geography, little clues to the story of how the system was built and how it has evolved over time. The coffee houses of 17th century London were, in many ways, the original social network. They were nodes in a citywide information system. Runners would move between the coffee houses, carrying the latest news, stock prices, and political gossip. Patrons would come to their preferred coffee house not just for the drink, but to plug into this network, to get the latest updates and to share their own information. It was a physical, analog version of a modern-day newsfeed or social media platform. The connections and conversations that took place in these spaces were vital to the functioning of the city's commercial and intellectual life. They were crucibles of modernity, spaces where the very idea of a well-informed public was being forged. A waiter approaches. You don't ask for a wine list, you order a bee's knees or a sidecar. The cocktails are designed to mask the often harsh, questionable taste of the bootleg gin or whiskey, which was sometimes distilled in bathtubs. The global coffee belt, the region around the equator between the tropics of Cancer and Capricorn where coffee grows best, is a geographical band that has been shaped by politics, economics, and climate. The countries within this belt, from Colombia and Brazil to Ethiopia and Vietnam, have economies that are often heavily dependent on the price of coffee on the world market. This has made them vulnerable to price fluctuations and the power of large multinational corporations. The rise of the fair trade movement in recent decades has been an attempt to address this power imbalance, to ensure that the farmers who actually grow the coffee receive a fair and stable price for their crop. It is an ongoing effort to make the global coffee trade more equitable and sustainable. The failure of the Great Emu War led to a more mundane but far more effective solution, the bounty system. This shift from a military to an economic approach is a recurring theme in history. When a grand, top-down solution fails, a more decentralized, incentive-based approach often succeeds. The bounty system harnessed the local knowledge and individual initiative of thousands of farmers and hunters, a force that proved to be far more adaptable and persistent than a small, formal military unit. It's a quiet testament to the power of distributed problem-solving. The war wasn't won by a single, decisive battle, but by a long, slow process of attrition driven by a simple economic reward. The sheer resilience of the emus is a central character in the story. These birds are tough. They can survive in harsh, arid conditions, run at speeds of up to 30 miles per hour, and have a thick coat of feathers that apparently offered some protection from the machine gun pellets. The soldiers' reports are filled with a grudging respect for their avian adversaries. They described the birds as having the, quote, invulnerability of tanks and praised their remarkable ability to carry wounds and keep running. The war was a classic case of underestimating the enemy. The soldiers went in expecting a simple culling operation and found themselves in a frustrating and unwinnable conflict against a surprisingly formidable foe. Hedy Lamarr's decision to give her patent to the U.S. Navy for free is a remarkable detail. At a time when she was one of the highest-paid actresses in the world, she was not looking for financial gain from her invention. Her motivation was purely patriotic. She was a refugee from a fascist-controlled Europe, and she was desperate to contribute to the war effort against the Nazis in a meaningful way. Her offer was an act of genuine, selfless patriotism. The Navy's rejection of her gift is therefore even more poignant. They didn't just dismiss a clever idea. They turned away a heartfelt and valuable contribution from a citizen who was uniquely positioned to help. The story of Hedy Lamarr's invention is also a story about the power of collaboration. She had the brilliant, world-changing idea, but she needed George Antheil's specific, esoteric knowledge to make it tangible. Their partnership is a perfect example of how innovation often happens at the intersection of different fields and different ways of thinking. It was the combination of the glamorous movie star's insight and the avant-garde composer's mechanical skill that created the breakthrough. It's a reminder that great ideas often require a team, a willingness to seek out expertise in unexpected places, and the fusion of different perspectives to bring them to life. The London Underground's role as a bomb shelter during the Blitz is one of its most defining moments. It created a deep, emotional bond between the city and its transport system. For thousands of Londoners, the tube was not just a way to get to work, it was a sanctuary that saved their lives. The platforms became temporary homes, with improvised beds, canteens, and even libraries. This experience forged a unique sense of community in the dark, a shared resilience in the face of nightly terror. The memory of the Blitz spirit in the underground is a powerful part of London's identity, a symbol of the city's ability to endure and overcome its darkest hours. The sound of the underground is a unique and instantly recognizable part of the London experience. Each line has its own distinct noises. The deep, low rumble of the older subsurface lines, the high-pitched screech of the wheels on a tight curve in a deep-level tube, the sudden rush of air that precedes a train's arrival at a platform, and, of course, the famous automated announcement, "Mind the gap." These sounds form an auditory map of the city, a familiar soundtrack to the daily lives of millions. For anyone who has lived in or spent time in London, these sounds can evoke a powerful sense of place and memory. The story of the Boston Tea Party's impact on American beverage choice is a wonderful example of how cultural habits can be shaped by political events. The act of choosing coffee over tea became a small, daily act of rebellion, a way for ordinary people to express their political allegiance. It's a reminder that the things we eat and drink are not just matters of personal taste. They are often deeply imbued with cultural and political meaning. The American preference for coffee, which endures to this day, has its roots in this pivotal moment of national identity formation. The nation's coffee habit was born in a revolutionary act of defiance against attacks on tea. The concept of the third place, popularized by Starbucks, has had a profound impact on modern urban life. The idea is that in addition to home, the first place, and work, the second place, people need a third place, a comfortable, welcoming public space where they can relax, socialize, and feel a sense of community. For many, the modern coffee shop has become this essential third place. It's a neutral ground where people can meet friends, work remotely, or simply sit and be alone, but in public. This transformation of the coffee shop, from a simple purveyor of drinks to a vital piece of social infrastructure, is one of the most significant cultural shifts in recent decades. The final legacy of the Great Emu War might just be the story itself. It has survived and spread not because of its historical significance, but because it is a wonderfully compelling and shareable narrative. It has all the elements of a great tale: a clear conflict, unlikely heroes or anti-heroes, a series of comical failures, and a surprising outcome. In the age of the internet, it has found a new life as a popular meme and a go-to piece of historical trivia. Its endurance is a testament to the human love for a good story, especially one that is strange, funny, and a little bit humbling. The emus lost some battles, but they definitively won the narrative war. Your drink arrives, not in a fancy glass, but in a teacup or a coffee mug. It's a clever little bit of plausible deniability. If the police were to raid the place, you could all pretend you were just having a very loud, very smoky tea party. Reflecting on Heidi Lamar's later life, there is a certain irony in the fact that she became a recluse who communicated primarily by phone. The inventor whose work would lay the foundation for modern wireless communication ultimately chose to interact with the world through a wired connection. It's a small, poignant detail that speaks to her complex relationship with the world and with technology. She helped create a world of constant, mobile connectivity, but she herself preferred distance and privacy. It's as if, having given the world a powerful new tool for communication, she had little interest in using its descendants herself, preferring the quiet solitude that her fame had so long denied her. The visual identity of the London Underground is so strong that it has become a template for what a modern transit system should look like. The use of a simple, bold symbol, the roundel, a clean, proprietary typeface, Johnston, and a color-coded schematic map, the Beck map, has been enormously influential. This integrated design system created a sense of order and clarity that has been emulated by cities around the globe. It was a pioneering example of corporate branding being used for public good, to make a complex system intuitive and accessible to everyone, regardless of their language or familiarity with the city. It's a design legacy that continues to shape our urban environments. The global spread of coffee culture has led to a fascinating process of localization. While you can now find a latte in almost any city in the world, local traditions remain strong and are often blended with global trends. In Vietnam, you have Café Da, strong, dark roast coffee brewed through a small metal filter called a fin and mixed with sweetened condensed milk, served over ice. In Scandinavia, there is karsk, a cocktail of coffee and moonshine. In Ethiopia, the birthplace of coffee, the traditional coffee ceremony is an elaborate ritual of roasting, grinding, and brewing the beans, which is a cornerstone of social life. This beautiful diversity shows coffee's remarkable ability to adapt to and become part of different cultures. The sheer numbers involved in the Great Emu War are part of its charm. An army of 20,000 emus sounds like a force from a fantasy novel. The provision of 10,000 rounds of ammunition for 2 machine guns speaks to the seriousness with which the military initially approached the task. And the final, dismal statistics, thousands of rounds fired for a paltry number of kills, perfectly quantify the extent of the failure. These numbers give the story a kind of statistical absurdity. It's not just a story about failing. It's a story about failing on a measurable, almost spectacular scale, which makes the narrative all the more compelling and humorous. Hedy Lamarr's scientific curiosity was evident from a young age. As a child, she would famously dismantle and reassemble her music box to understand how it worked. This innate desire to look inside things, to understand the mechanics behind the facade, is the hallmark of an inventor's mind. It's a trait that stayed with her throughout her life. While Hollywood was fixated on her external beauty, she was always more interested in the internal workings of the world around her, from torpedo guidance systems to carbonated drink tablets. This fundamental curiosity was the driving force behind her secret life, the engine of her hidden genius. The cut-and-cover method used to build the first London Underground lines was a profoundly brutal and invasive form of construction. It left a permanent scar on the city, as entire neighborhoods were razed and streets were reshaped to accommodate the railway trench. The process was a literal upheaval of urban life. Yet, it was this very disruption that allowed for the creation of a system that would ultimately bring order and efficiency to the city's chaotic transport. It was a classic case of short-term pain for long-term gain, a surgical procedure on the city that was messy and traumatic, but ultimately essential for its survival and growth. The term penny university for the early English coffeehouses is wonderfully evocative. It captures the democratic and accessible nature of the knowledge that was shared within their walls. For the price of a cup of coffee, anyone, regardless of their social standing, could gain access to the latest ideas, news, and debates. This was a radical departure from the formal, exclusive world of traditional universities. The coffeehouse was a space of informal learning and open discourse, a place where a new, more informed and engaged public could be forged. It was a key institution in the democratization of knowledge during the Enlightenment. A quiet, final thought on the emus. They remain a potent national symbol in Australia, appearing on the country's coat of arms alongside the kangaroo. The fact that the nation's military once declared war on, and effectively lost to, one of its own national symbols is an irony that is not lost on Australians. It adds a layer of self-deprecating humor to the national identity. The emu, in this context, represents not just the unique wildlife of the continent, but also the wild, untamable spirit of the land itself. A force that resists easy control and occasionally makes a fool of human ambition. One of the most enduring legacies of Hedy Lamarr is the way her story forces us to reconsider the meaning of intelligence. Her genius was not of the academic, formally trained variety. It was intuitive, creative, and associative. She saw a connection between a player piano and a torpedo that no one else did. This kind of out-of-the-box thinking is often the source of the most profound breakthroughs. Her story champions a broader, more inclusive definition of intelligence, one that values creativity, curiosity, and the ability to synthesize ideas from different domains as much as it values formal education and technical expertise. The London Underground map is a masterpiece of abstraction. By sacrificing geographical accuracy for topological clarity, Harry Beck created something that was not just a map, but a tool for understanding. He understood that for a passenger navigating the system, the exact twists and turns of the tunnel and the precise distance between stations were irrelevant. What mattered was the sequence of stations and the points of connection. His map is a beautiful example of the principle that sometimes, to make something more useful, you have to make it less real. It's an iconic piece of information design that changed the way we visualize networks. The conversations around you are animated. People are talking about Charles Lindbergh, the new talking pictures, the stock market that only ever seems to go up. There's a heady sense of optimism, a feeling that the future is a wide-open road. The global coffee crisis of the early 2000s, when the price of coffee plummeted to a 30-year low, had a devastating impact on millions of small-scale coffee farmers around the world. It highlighted the inherent volatility and inequality of the global commodity market. This crisis was a major catalyst for the growth of the fair trade movement and the rise of third-wave coffee culture, with its emphasis on direct relationships between roasters and farmers. It was a wake-up call for consumers in the industry, prompting a greater awareness of the human and environmental costs of cheap coffee and fostering a new appreciation for a more ethical and sustainable supply chain. The Great Emu War has a curious parallel in other similar wars against animals throughout history. In 19th century America, there were bounty programs and organized culls to eradicate wolves and coyotes from ranching lands. In China, during the Great Leap Forward, Mao Zedong declared war on sparrows as part of the Four Pests campaign, leading to an ecological disaster. These stories share a common theme: a centralized, state-driven attempt to impose order on a complex ecosystem, often with unintended and disastrous consequences. The Emu War is simply the most comically inept and therefore the most memorable example of this particular brand of human folly. There's a certain cinematic quality to Heidi Lamar's story. The glamorous movie star leading a double life as a secret inventor, the escape from a villainous arms dealer, the unheeded warning to the government, the final late-life vindication. It all sounds like the plot of a Hollywood movie. It's a case of life being stranger and more compelling than fiction. Perhaps this is why her story has had such a renaissance in recent years. It's a narrative that is not only historically significant but also deeply satisfying on a storytelling level. It has heroes, villains, conflict, and a powerful, uplifting message. The experience of being on a crowded London tube train during rush hour is a very specific form of urban existence. It's a state of extreme physical proximity combined with a strict code of social distance. People are packed together, closer than they would be with their own family, yet they go to great lengths to avoid interaction, retreating into books, music, or their own thoughts. It is a shared solitude, a collective experience of being alone together. This unspoken etiquette is a fascinating example of the unwritten social contracts that allow a massive, diverse city to function on a day-to-day basis. The decaffeination process is a curious footnote in the history of coffee. It was first developed commercially in the early 20th century by a German coffee merchant named Ludwig Roselius. The story goes that he discovered the process by accident when a shipment of coffee beans was soaked in seawater during a storm, which leached out some of the caffeine without destroying the flavor. This led him to experiment with various solvents to remove caffeine on an industrial scale. The invention of decaf coffee allowed people to enjoy the taste and ritual of coffee without the stimulating effect, expanding its market even further. It was another step in the human quest to master and modify the bean to our specific desires. The emu's leader, as described by the soldiers, was often a particularly large bird that would keep watch while the others fed, giving a warning call that sent the flock scattering. This suggests a level of social organization and communication that the military men had not anticipated. They were not fighting a mindless mob, but a coordinated, if loosely structured group with its own internal systems of defense. This detail adds another layer to the story, elevating the emus from simple pests to worthy and intelligent adversaries, further deepening the absurdity of the army's failure. It is fascinating to think about what other inventions Heidi Lamar might have created if her intellect had been nurtured and encouraged by the world around her. Her mind was constantly working, constantly trying to solve problems. Given the right resources and support, what else might she have come up with? Her story is not just one of a great achievement, but also one of untapped potential. It leaves us to wonder about the countless ideas and innovations that may have been lost to history, simply because the people who conceived them were not in a position to be heard. The London Underground has its own unique ecosystem. Scientists have discovered a species of mosquito, Culex molestus, that lives in the tube tunnels and has evolved to be genetically distinct from its above-ground cousins. It has adapted to the warm, subterranean environment, bites humans rather than birds, and does not need to hibernate. It is a remarkable example of rapid evolution in a man-made environment. The tube is not just a transport system, it is a habitat, a unique ecological niche that has given rise to a new form of life, perfectly adapted to its strange, sunless world. The link between coffee and creativity has long been a subject of fascination. The French writer Honoré de Balzac was famously powered by coffee, reportedly drinking up to 50 cups a day to fuel his marathon writing sessions. The philosopher Søren Kierkegaard had a complex ritual involving pouring hot coffee over a pyramid of sugar in his cup. The stimulant effect of caffeine, which increases alertness and concentration, has made it the drug of choice for writers, artists, and thinkers for centuries. The coffee house itself, as a place of intellectual cross-pollination, further cemented this association between the drink and the creative spark. The Great Emu War concluded with Major Meredith reflecting on the remarkable tactical skills of the emus. He noted their ability to split into small groups, and the fact that each group seemed to have a leader who would keep watch. He concluded with a note of professional respect that if there were a division of these birds, they would be able to face any army in the world. This final, grudging praise from the commander of the failed operation is the perfect, ironic capstone to the story. The soldier, defeated, pays his respects to the superior tactics of his feathered opponents. You might see a flapper take to the small dance floor. She's doing the Charleston, a wild, leg-kicking dance that is as much a rejection of the old, formal waltzes as her bobbed hair is a rejection of Victorian norms. Hedy Lamarr's contribution to technology was ultimately recognized by the U.S. military, albeit decades later. The principles of her frequency hopping patent were incorporated into military communication systems, particularly after the technology was declassified. Today, spread-spectrum technology is vital for secure, jam-proof military communications. So, while the Navy of the 1940s dismissed her idea, the armed forces of today rely on the very principles she pioneered. It's a vindication that is both complete and profoundly delayed. The gift she offered in wartime was finally accepted in peacetime, long after she had moved on. The London Underground has always been a mirror of the city's social anxieties. In the 19th century, people feared the tunnels would collapse, or that they would be asphyxiated. During the Cold War, there was a widespread belief that the tube would be used as a nuclear fallout shelter, and secret plans were indeed made for this purpose. In the 21st century, concerns have shifted to overcrowding and terrorism. The hopes and fears of Londoners are etched into the history of the system. It is not just a neutral piece of infrastructure. It is a space that absorbs and reflects the psychological state of the city it serves. The coffee break is a relatively modern invention that has become an institution in many workplaces. It was heavily promoted in the 1950s by the Pan American Coffee Bureau, a trade association of coffee-producing countries, with an advertising campaign that declared, "Give yourself a coffee break and get what coffee gives to you." The campaign was incredibly successful, and the concept of a short, scheduled break from work for a cup of coffee became a standard part of the workday. It was a clever piece of marketing that embedded the consumption of coffee even more deeply into the structure of modern life. One of the most charming details of the Great Emu War is the simple fact that the farmers, who were veterans of World War I, specifically requested the use of Lewis guns. This was the weapon they knew and trusted from their time in the trenches. There's a certain logic to it. They had a pest problem, and they asked for the best pest control tool they had ever encountered. The irony, of course, is that a weapon designed to be devastatingly effective against massed human infantry in a static war proved to be almost useless against the fluid guerrilla tactics of a flock of birds. It was a classic case of fighting the last war. The name Hedy Lamarr itself was a Hollywood invention. Her given name was Hedwig Kiesler. The surname Lamarr was chosen by Louis B. Mayer's wife, in homage to the silent film star Barbara Lamarr, who was known for her tragic beauty. This act of renaming was a key part of her transformation from a European actress into an American movie star. It was a symbolic stripping away of her old identity to create a new, marketable persona. It's another layer of the artifice that surrounded her, a reminder that the woman the world knew was, from the very beginning, a carefully constructed character. The padded cells of the first deep-level tube line, the City and South London Railway, are a curious detail. The carriages had no windows, as it was thought that passengers would have nothing to look at in the dark tunnels and might become dizzy. The high-backed, upholstered seating was designed for comfort, but the combination of the windowless confinement and the padded interior gave them their famous, slightly unnerving nickname. It speaks to the experimental nature of this early technology. The designers were inventing a new kind of travel experience from scratch, and some of their initial choices were, in retrospect, a little strange. The discovery of coffee in the 9th century, whether by Caldi or by others, represents a significant moment in the history of human consciousness. Before coffee and tea, the primary psychoactive substances widely available were depressants, like alcohol. The introduction of a common, socially acceptable stimulant changed everything. It offered a way to enhance focus, delay sleep, and sharpen the mind. This new state of being had profound effects on work, art, religion, and politics. The simple discovery of a plant with a specific chemical compound had the power to alter the rhythm of human thought and the course of civilization. The Great Emu War serves as a timeless allegory for any situation where a supposedly simple plan goes comically wrong. It's the life went horribly wrong train in historical form. It's the story of a home renovation that was supposed to take a weekend and ends up taking 6 months. It's the story of a software update that is supposed to fix one bug and ends up creating 10 new ones. The universal, relatable theme of a straightforward task spiraling into a chaotic and humbling mess is what gives the story its enduring appeal and makes it such a soothing and humorous tale to recall. It's worth noting that George Antheil, Heidi Lamar's collaborator, also had a side career that was almost as strange as his music. In addition to being a composer, he wrote a syndicated advice column for The Lovelorn and penned several books on, of all things, endocrinology, the study of glands. He was a true polymath and eccentric, a man of wide-ranging and often bizarre interests. The fact that he and Heidi Lamar found each other in the social scene of 1940s Hollywood is a wonderful historical accident, a perfect storm of creativity that brought together two of the most unusual and brilliant minds of their time. The spiral escalators at Holloway Road Station are a fascinating and forgotten piece of London Underground history. In the early 20th century, an experimental escalator with a spiral design was installed at the station. It was a complex and beautiful piece of engineering, but it was ultimately deemed too slow and impractical and was never open to the public. The remains of this technological dead end are still there, hidden away in a disused part of the station, a monument to an innovative idea that didn't quite work out. It's a reminder that the history of technology is filled not just with successes, but with fascinating failures and evolutionary dead ends. There's always a low-level hum of anxiety beneath the revelry. The threat of a police raid is constant. A sudden hush, a change in the music's tempo. Everyone is attuned to the slightest sign that the party might be over. The attempted bans on coffee throughout history were often framed in moral or religious terms, but they were usually rooted in political fear. Rulers recognized that the coffee house was a space outside of their direct control, a place where people could gather, share information, and form opinions. This was a threat to autocratic power. The fight over coffee was, in many ways, a fight over the existence of a public sphere. The ultimate failure of these bans was a victory for free association and the open exchange of ideas. The humble coffee bean was, in its own way, a revolutionary agent. The choice to send a military force rather than, say, agricultural specialists to deal with the emus speaks volumes about the mindset of the time. The 1930s was an era of rising militarism globally, and the idea of a military solution to a domestic problem was perhaps not as strange as it seems to us today. The farmers themselves were ex-soldiers, and they naturally turned to a military-style solution. It was a classic example of the, if all you have is a hammer, everything looks like a nail problem. In this case, the hammer was a Lewis machine gun, and the nail was a flock of very uncooperative birds. In her autobiography, Ecstasy in Me, Heidi Lamar expressed deep ambivalence about her own beauty. She saw it as a mask that prevented people from seeing her true self. "Any girl can be glamorous," she wrote. "All you have to do is stand still and look stupid." This quote perfectly encapsulates the frustration of her life. She felt that her physical appearance was a barrier, a distraction that made her real, inner life, her thoughts, her ideas, her inventions, invisible to the world. It's a poignant reflection on the loneliness that can come from being admired, for all the wrong reasons. The London Underground has a rich history of poster art. From the very beginning, the company commissioned leading artists and designers to create posters that would entice people to use the system, not just for commuting, but for leisure. These posters advertised trips to the countryside, visits to museums, and outings to the zoo, all accessible via the tube. This collection of artwork, spanning over a century, is a stunning visual record of the city's changing artistic styles and social habits. It is one of the most significant and beautiful collections of graphic design in the world, born from the simple need to sell train tickets. The health effects of coffee have been debated for centuries. It has been blamed for everything from stunting growth to causing nervous disorders. In the 17th century, a group of London women petitioned to have coffee banned, claiming it made their husbands infertile and that they were spending all their time in coffee houses instead of at home. Today's scientific research has largely vindicated coffee, with studies showing that moderate consumption is associated with a lower risk of several diseases. The long history of coffee-related health scares is a fascinating look at how society has grappled with the effects of this powerful and beloved stimulant. There's a certain quiet dignity in the way the Great Emu War ended. There was no peace treaty, no formal surrender. The military simply packed up its guns and went home, admitting defeat. It was a quiet, unceremonious conclusion to a strange and ill-advised adventure. The emus, for their part, continued their migration, blissfully unaware of the official cessation of hostilities. Nature had, in its own indifferent way, won. The conflict just fizzled out. This anticlimax is part of the story's charm. It's a conflict that ends not with a bang, but with a quiet, mutual disengagement. The fact that Hedy Lamarr's patent for the secret communication system was granted under her married name at the time, Hetty Keesler Markey, helped to obscure her involvement for many years. When researchers first came across the patent, the name Hedy Lamarr was nowhere to be seen. This small detail of nomenclature contributed to the long delay in giving her proper credit. It's another layer of the hidden figure aspect of her story. Her genius was hidden not just by her fame, but by the simple bureaucratic act of changing her name upon marriage. The circular route of the Circle Line on the London Underground map is a geographical lie, but a useful one. In reality, the line is not a perfect circle, but a winding, irregular loop. Harry Beck's decision to represent it as a circle on his schematic map was a bold move that prioritized simplicity and elegance over strict accuracy. This decision has been so influential that most people now think of the line as an actual circle. It's a powerful example of how a well-designed map can shape our mental model of a city, replacing the messy reality with a cleaner, more orderly abstraction. Instant coffee, invented and perfected in the 20th century, had a massive impact on global coffee consumption. It was cheap, easy to make, and had a long shelf life. It became standard issue for soldiers in World War II, further cementing coffee's association with the military and with American culture. While coffee connoisseurs often look down on it, instant coffee brought the beverage to millions of people who might not have had the time or equipment to brew it from beans. It was a triumph of convenience and a key driver in making coffee a truly global, everyday drink. Let's consider the perspective of the individual soldiers in the Emu War. Imagine being Gunner J. O'Halloran, sitting behind a state-of-the-art machine gun, a weapon that had brought terror to the battlefields of Europe, and finding yourself unable to hit a single, large, flightless bird running across a plain. The frustration and sense of futility must have been immense. The story is often told from a high level, as a military or political failure, but at its heart, it's a story of three men in the field, tasked with an impossible and increasingly ridiculous mission, a tale of personal, professional humiliation in the dusty outback. The alcohol is strong, the room is hot, and the night blurs into a kaleidoscope of sound, laughter, and shimmering beads. It's less about glamour, and more about a raw, defiant pursuit of freedom in a world that felt both restrictive and full of endless possibility. Hedy Lamarr's interest in science and technology was not just a hobby, it was a deep and serious part of her identity. She had a full inventing table set up in her home and collaborated with various experts, including the aviation tycoon Howard Hughes, with whom she had a romantic relationship. She reportedly gave him advice on aircraft design, suggesting that he change the square design of his planes, wings to a more streamlined, curved shape, based on the anatomy of birds and fish. She was a constant observer and improver, a woman whose mind was always looking for a better way to design the world. The tiling in the London Underground, particularly the work of Leslie Green in the early 20th century, was not just decorative, it was also highly practical. The glazed ceramic tiles were durable, easy to clean, and reflected light, making the subterranean stations feel brighter and more sanitary. Each station was also given its own unique color scheme and pattern, so that illiterate passengers could recognize their stop by sight. This was a simple but brilliant piece of inclusive design, a way of making the system accessible to everyone. The beauty of the tile work had a deeply functional purpose. The second crack is a term used in coffee roasting. As the coffee beans are heated, they first let out a crack sound as moisture escapes, similar to the sound of popcorn popping. If the roast continues, the beans will undergo a second, quieter crack as the cellular structure of the bean begins to fracture. Darker roasts, like those popular in the second wave of coffee, are often taken to or just beyond this second crack. The terminology and science of coffee roasting reveal a deep and complex craft, a precise art of applying heat to a bean to unlock its desired flavors, from bright and acidic to rich and chocolatey. The ultimate irony of the Great Emu War is that the military's actions may have actually made the problem worse. By targeting the large, organized flocks, they may have simply caused these flocks to break up into smaller, more numerous groups that then spread out over a wider area, causing damage to even more farms. It's a classic example of an intervention having unintended negative consequences. Their attempt to impose order on the emu population may have, in fact, created more chaos, a fittingly absurd outcome for a deeply absurd conflict. In a way, Hedy Lamarr's life was a performance of frequency hopping itself. She was constantly switching between different roles and identities: Viennese ingenue, trophy wife to an arms dealer, glamorous Hollywood star, reclusive inventor. She moved between these different frequencies of existence, never staying in one place for too long. This constant shifting was perhaps a survival mechanism, a way to navigate a world that was always trying to pin her down and define her. Her life, like her invention, was a complex and constantly changing pattern, difficult to track and impossible to contain. The GO station of Down Street has a particularly glamorous history. During the Blitz, it was converted into a top-secret bomb-proof shelter for the Railway Executive Committee, which was vital for keeping the nation's railways running during the war. It had offices, meeting rooms, dormitories, and a dining room that reportedly served surprisingly good food. Prime Minister Winston Churchill was a frequent visitor, nicknaming it the Burrow. It's a fascinating juxtaposition. A grimy, disused tube station transformed into a vital, secret hub of the war effort, complete with fine dining, deep beneath the ground. The phrase, "a storm in a teacup," is often used to describe a great fuss made about a trivial matter. The story of Pope Clement VIII baptizing coffee is, in a way, a storm in a coffee cup. The controversy over whether Christians should be allowed to drink this Muslim beverage seems utterly bizarre to us today, but at the time, it was a serious theological and political issue. The story serves as a wonderful reminder of how the definitions of us and them, of what is acceptable and what is foreign, can be so arbitrary and can change so dramatically over time. The legacy of the Great Emu War is, in the end, one of storytelling. It's a historical event that feels more like a folktale or a tall tale. It has been passed down and embellished over the years, becoming a cornerstone of Australian self-deprecating humor. The fact that it really happened only makes it better. It's a perfect, bite-sized piece of history that is easy to tell, easy to remember, and guaranteed to elicit a smile. It is history not as a dry academic subject, but as a great and endlessly entertaining story to be shared. Hedy Lamarr was inducted into the National Inventors Hall of Fame in 2014 posthumously. This official recognition cemented her place in the pantheon of great American innovators. The citation for her induction acknowledges her co-invention of a quote, frequency-hopping spread-spectrum communication system that is a quote, forerunner to many wireless communications technologies. It's a dry, technical description that barely hints at the incredible, stranger-than-fiction story behind the invention. But it is, finally, the credit and the legacy that she deserved all along. Her name is now officially associated not just with glamour, but with genius. The disused tunnels and shafts of the London Underground are sometimes used for other purposes. They have been used as locations for filming movies and TV shows, as secure storage facilities, and even for growing hydroponic plants. One company has set up a sustainable urban farm in a disused tunnel near Clapham, growing salad greens and herbs under LED lights. It's a wonderful example of adaptive reuse, of finding new life and new purpose in the forgotten subterranean spaces of the city. The underground continues to evolve and surprise, finding new ways to serve the city above it. As you finally leave, stepping back out of the smoky cocoon and into the cool night air, the silence of the alley feels strange. The secret world vanishes behind the closing door, as if it were never there. The ritual of drinking coffee is, for many, a form of personal meditation. The process of grinding the beans, boiling the water, and carefully brewing the coffee can be a calming and centering start to the day. It is a moment of quiet focus before the noise of the world begins. This personal, almost spiritual connection to the drink is a far cry from its origins as a social lubricant in public coffee houses. It shows how a single substance can hold many different meanings, from a catalyst for public debate to a tool for private contemplation. The image of the truck-mounted Lewis gun crashing into a fence while chasing an emu is perhaps the single most memorable scene from the entire Emu War. It is a perfect slapstick moment, a physical manifestation of the entire campaign's futility. It encapsulates the clash between rigid, mechanical technology and fluid, natural agility. The machine, designed for the predictable battlefields of Europe, was simply no match for the unpredictable terrain of the Australian bush and the erratic movements of its native inhabitants. It's a moment of pure historical comedy. Hedy Lamarr's story is ultimately one of empowerment. Despite being consistently underestimated and dismissed, she never stopped believing in her own intellectual capabilities. She continued to invent, to tinker, and to think, even when the world told her that her only value was in her face. Her eventual recognition is a victory for every person who has ever been told they don't fit the mold, for every mind that has been overlooked because of the packaging it came in. Her story is a powerful testament to the importance of intellectual self-reliance and the quiet confidence of knowing your own worth. The air in the London Underground has its own unique chemical signature. It's a cocktail of microscopic particles, including iron oxide from the wear of the rails and wheels, skin cells from millions of passengers, and various fibers from their clothing. Researchers who study this tube dust can learn a great deal about the system and the people who use it. It's a strange and fascinating thought that the very air in the tunnels is a kind of archive, a dusty record of the daily passage of humanity through this subterranean world. Kopi Luwak, or civet coffee, is one of the strangest and most expensive coffees in the world. It is made from coffee cherries that have been eaten and partially digested by the Asian palm civet, a small cat-like mammal. The cherries are then defecated and collected by farmers. The enzymes in the civet's digestive tract are said to alter the chemical structure of the beans, resulting in a smoother, less acidic coffee. While it is a novelty, the production of Kopi Luwak is often associated with animal cruelty, as civets are frequently captured and force-fed coffee cherries in cramped cages. It's a dark and controversial corner of the specialty coffee world. The Great Emu War is a story that has only grown more popular with time. In an age of complex global problems, there is something deeply comforting about a historical conflict with such clear, simple, and low stakes. No humans died, no territory was permanently lost, and the enemy was a flock of birds. It is a safe and gentle story of failure, one that we can reflect on with amusement rather than sorrow. It is a perfect bedtime story from history, a conflict with no lasting trauma, only a legacy of gentle absurdity. Hedy Lamarr's relationship with the press was complex. In her heyday, she was a media darling, her every move chronicled by gossip columnists. But in her later years, as she became more reclusive, the media narrative turned against her. She was often portrayed as a tragic, washed-up figure. This shift highlights the fickle and often cruel nature of fame. The same media machine that builds a star can just as easily tear them down. Hedy's withdrawal from public life can be seen as a final, defiant act of taking back control of her own narrative, of refusing to play the part the media had assigned her. The future of the London Underground involves even more automation. Newer lines and signaling systems are designed to allow for fully driverless trains, increasing frequency and efficiency. This move towards automation is the next logical step in the system's long history of technological evolution. from steam to electricity and now to artificial intelligence. However, it is also a source of controversy, with debates about safety, job losses, and the loss of the human element in a system that has always been staffed by dedicated drivers, station attendants, and engineers. The tube continues to be a site where the future of urban life is being negotiated. The culture of coffee in Italy is a world unto itself. Coffee is typically consumed quickly, standing at a bar or al banco. The espresso is the gold standard, a small, intense shot of coffee that is downed in a few sips. Milky drinks like cappuccino or cafe latte are strictly for the morning and are never ordered after a meal. The rules and rituals surrounding coffee are deeply ingrained in the daily life of the country. To drink coffee like an Italian is to participate in a rich and specific cultural performance, a tradition that has been refined over generations. A final, quiet detail about the Emu War. After the military's withdrawal, some of the embattled farmers were reportedly seen using their own, simpler methods to deal with the emus, including one farmer who claimed to have killed a bird with a stick. This detail, whether true or apocryphal, adds a final layer of irony to the tale. After the failure of the most advanced military technology of the day, the conflict returned to its most primitive roots, a direct confrontation between man and beast, with far more basic tools. It's a humbling end to a high-tech misadventure. The walk home is quieter. The city is starting to sleep, but the jazz rhythm still thrums in your ears. The night wasn't just a party. It was a small victory, a taste of a new, modern world you were helping to create. Hedy Lamarr's story is a powerful counter-narrative to the lone genius myth. While she had the foundational idea, her breakthrough was only made possible through her collaboration with George Antheil. It reminds us that innovation is rarely a solo act. It is often a social process, a conversation between different minds with different skills and perspectives. The image of the isolated inventor having a sudden eureka moment is a romantic but often inaccurate one. More often, progress is a messy, collaborative, and conversational process, just like the one that took place in Hedy Lamarr's living room. The iconic moquette fabrics used for the seating on the London Underground are a key part of its design identity. Each line has its own unique, often brightly colored and boldly patterned, moquette design. This tradition of bespoke fabrics dates back to the 1930s. The patterns are designed to be visually interesting but also incredibly hard-wearing, able to withstand the daily use of millions of passengers. They are a small but important detail that contributes to the overall aesthetic experience of the tube, a touch of comfort and design in a purely functional space. They are, in their own way, a form of public art. The rise of single-serve coffee pods in the 21st century represents the latest chapter in the history of coffee and convenience. These systems offer a perfectly consistent cup of coffee at the push of a button, with a huge variety of flavors and blends. However, they have also sparked significant controversy due to the environmental impact of the disposable pods, which generate a massive amount of plastic and aluminum waste. The debate over coffee pods is a modern-day version of the age-old tension in coffee's history, the conflict between convenience, quality, cost, and sustainability. The story of the Great Emu War is, at its core, a story about the limits of power. The Australian military, a symbol of state power and control, was rendered impotent by a flock of birds. It's a humbling lesson that no matter how advanced our technology or how well organized our institutions, there are forces in the world that are beyond our command. The emu's victory was a victory for chaos over order, for instinct over strategy, for nature over the machine. It's a soothing reminder that the world is, and always will be, a little bit wilder than we think. Hedy Lamarr's dual legacy as both a movie star and an inventor can be difficult to reconcile. The two identities seem to belong to different worlds, but perhaps the key is to see them as two expressions of the same creative impulse. Acting is a form of construction, of building a character and a performance. Inventing is a form of construction, of building a device or a system. Both require imagination, a deep understanding of how things work, whether it's human emotion or a radio frequency, and the ability to create something new out of the raw materials of the world. Perhaps they were not two separate lives, but two facets of one, remarkably creative, life. The constant rumble of the London Underground is a physical presence in the city. In many older buildings near the tube lines, You can feel a faint vibration and hear a low rumble every few minutes as a train passes deep below. It is a ghostly reminder of the vast, hidden city of tunnels and tracks that exists beneath the surface. This sensory experience connects the people on the surface to the hidden machinery of the city, a constant, physical link to the network that keeps London moving. It is the city's heartbeat, felt in the foundations of its buildings. The coffee ceremony in Ethiopia is a beautiful and elaborate ritual that stands in stark contrast to the quick, transactional nature of modern coffee culture. It is an integral part of social and cultural life, a sign of hospitality and respect. The ceremony involves the hostess roasting the green coffee beans over a small brazier, grinding them with a mortar and pestle, and then brewing the coffee in a traditional clay pot called a jabina. The coffee is served in small, handleless cups, and it is considered impolite to leave before you have had at least 3 cups, as the 3rd cup is said to bestow a blessing. It is a slow, communal, and deeply meaningful experience. Thinking one last time about the Roaring Twenties night out we began with, it was an experience defined by its illegality. The thrill of the speakeasy came directly from the fact that it was forbidden. Prohibition, an amendment intended to enforce sobriety and public order, inadvertently created a glamorous, rebellious, and hugely profitable underworld culture. It was a classic case of a social policy having the exact opposite of its intended effect. The act of sharing a cocktail in a secret bar became a powerful symbol of personal liberty and a rejection of what many saw as intrusive government overreach. The party was so good precisely because it wasn't allowed. The legacy of the flapper, the iconic figure of the Roaring Twenties, is more than just a fashion statement. The bobbed hair, the short skirts, and the love of jazz and dancing were all external symbols of a profound internal shift. The flapper represented a new kind of woman, independent, mobile, and unwilling to be bound by the strict Victorian social codes of her parents' generation. She smoked, she drank, she dated, and she demanded a new level of social and economic freedom. She was a cultural pioneer, the advance guard of a social revolution that would continue to unfold for the rest of the century. The jazz music that filled the speakeasies was the soundtrack of this new, modern era. It was energetic, syncopated, and improvisational, a stark contrast to the formal, structured music of the past. Jazz was born in the African-American communities of New Orleans, and its spread across the country was a major cultural event. For many young people, both black and white, it was the sound of freedom, a raw and joyful expression of the fast-paced, sometimes chaotic energy of modern urban life. The saxophone's wail was the sound of the old world giving way to the new. And let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from. It's always so wonderful to see how far these stories travel. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for some white noise, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. And as you finally drift off to sleep, the scent of smoke and gin still clinging to your hair, you understand that a night out in the 20s was a thrilling, slightly dangerous, and utterly unforgettable experience. It was the feeling of being alive. The end of the Roaring Twenties came suddenly and catastrophically with the Wall Street crash of 1929. The boundless optimism, the sense that the party would never end, was shattered almost overnight. The era of easy credit, rising stocks, and lavish spending gave way to the bleak austerity of the Great Depression. The contrast between the hedonism of the 20s and the hardship of the 30s could not be more stark. The era of the speakeasy and the flapper became a kind of lost golden age, a memory of a wild, carefree time before the world changed forever. It was a brief, brilliant flash of light before a long period of darkness. As we let these stories settle, from the wild parties of the 20s to the wild plains of Australia, we can see how history is woven from these unexpected threads. It's a tapestry of grand events and small, absurd moments, of celebrated heroes and hidden geniuses. The Great Emu War, in its own way, is just as instructive as a major battle. It teaches us about hubris, about the limits of technology, and about the resilient, unpredictable power of the natural world. It's a story that reminds us to maintain a sense of humor about our own endeavors, a gentle nudge to not take ourselves quite so seriously. Hedy Lamarr's story is a profound commentary on the nature of seeing and being seen. The world saw her beauty but was blind to her mind. It's a powerful lesson in looking beyond the surface, in searching for the hidden complexities within people. Her dual life as a star and an inventor is a testament to the fact that people are rarely just one thing. We all contain multitudes, different identities and skills that may not be immediately apparent. Her story is an invitation to be more curious about the people around us, to wonder about the secret inventions and hidden talents they may be nurturing in private. The London Underground is a story of layers. There are the physical layers of clay and iron, the historical layers of Victorian engineering and modern architecture, and the social layers of the millions of people who use it every day. To ride the tube is to travel through these layers, to be a part of a living, breathing system that is a microcosm of the city itself. It is a story about the triumph of collective effort, of generations of people working together to build and maintain something vast, complex, and essential. It's a comforting thought, this reliable, hidden world beneath our feet. And the story of coffee is the story of a catalyst. It's a substance that has sparked conversations, revolutions, and new ideas for centuries. From the schools of the wise in the Ottoman Empire to the penny universities of London, coffee has a long history of bringing people together and fueling their minds. Its journey across the globe is a story of human connection, for better and for worse. It's a reminder that the most ordinary parts of our daily routine are often connected to an extraordinary global history, a web of stories that spans continents and centuries. The Speakeasy of the Roaring Twenties was a temporary autonomous zone, a pocket of freedom carved out of a restrictive society. Inside its smoky walls, a different set of rules applied. It was a space of social mixing, where people from different classes and backgrounds could mingle in a way that was not always possible in the more structured world outside. This temporary dissolution of social barriers was part of its thrill. It was a glimpse of a more fluid and less hierarchical world, a future that was being rehearsed in secret, one cocktail at a time. The failure of prohibition is a classic lesson in the limits of legislation to control human behavior. By making alcohol illegal, the government did not eliminate its consumption. It simply drove it underground, creating a massive and violent black market controlled by organized crime. It's a powerful historical example of how well-intentioned laws can have disastrous, unintended consequences. The ultimate repeal of prohibition in 1933 was an admission that trying to legislate morality on such a grand scale was a failed experiment. The party, it turned out, was impossible to stop. The emu's story is also one of adaptation. The reason they were drawn to the farmlands in the first place was because their traditional habitats and water sources were being impacted by the expansion of agriculture. Their invasion was a response to a changing environment. In a way, they were simply being resourceful, taking advantage of a new, reliable food source that had appeared in their territory. The conflict was not one of good versus evil, but a clash between two species trying to thrive in the same landscape. A timeless drama that continues to play out all over the world. The player piano, the unlikely key to Heidi Lamar's invention, is itself a fascinating piece of technology. It was one of the first forms of home entertainment automation, a way to reproduce a musical performance without a live musician. It was a bridge between the acoustic and the mechanical, the human and the machine. The idea of storing information on a perforated paper roll was a precursor to the punch cards that would be used in early computers. It's a beautiful example of how an obsolete technology can contain the seeds of a future one, a creative dead end that holds the key to a new beginning. The phrase "mind the gap" came about because some tube platforms are curved, creating a potentially dangerous gap between the straight edge of the train and the curved edge of the platform. The original recording, made in the 1960s, had a distinct clipped tone that became iconic. Over the years, different voices have been used, but the simple, three-word instruction has remained a constant. It is a perfect piece of public safety messaging, clear, concise, and unforgettable. It's a sound that is as much a part of the London experience as the sight of a red double-decker bus. Now, let's leave the smoky speakeasies of America and travel across the globe to the vast, sun-scorched plains of Western Australia. Our next story is less about glamour and more about a peculiar and, frankly, quite humbling conflict. It's 1932, and the world is in the grips of the Great Depression. For the farmers of Australia, many of them veterans of the Great War, life has become a desperate struggle. They were promised fertile land, a new beginning, But the reality was harsh soil and economic ruin. And just when they thought things couldn't get any worse, a new enemy appeared on the horizon. Not a foreign army, but a force of nature, an estimated 20,000 emus. These large, flightless birds, in their annual migration, discovered that the newly cultivated farmland was a rather wonderful all-you-can-eat buffet. They were decimating wheat crops, trampling fences, and generally making a difficult life impossible. The dark side of coffee's spread, its link to slavery and colonialism, is a crucial reminder that global trade has always had complex and often brutal consequences. The wealth and leisure that allowed for the flourishing of coffeehouse culture in Europe were built on the suffering of others. This is a difficult but necessary part of the story to acknowledge. It adds a layer of moral complexity to the history of this beloved beverage and encourages a more critical look at the global supply chains that bring us the products we enjoy today. The end of the Great Emu War was not the end of Australia's wars on its wildlife. The country has also had long-running conflicts with other species deemed to be pests, such as rabbits, which were an invasive species that caused massive ecological damage, and kangaroos, which compete with livestock for grazing land. These ongoing struggles highlight the unique challenges of human settlement on the Australian continent, a land with a fragile and ancient ecosystem that has often been at odds with the demands of European-style agriculture. The Emu War was just one particularly memorable chapter in this long and difficult story. It is a quiet and lovely thought that Hedy Lamarr's ashes were scattered in the Wienerwald, the Vienna woods, that surround her hometown. After a long and tumultuous life in the full glare of the public eye, a life of many names and many identities, this was a final return to her origins, to the place where she was just Hedwig Kiesler, a curious young girl walking with her father. It was a peaceful end to a life that was often anything but. It was a final, quiet retreat into the landscape that had first shaped her mind. The London Underground has served as an inspiration for countless works of fiction, from Neil Gaiman's fantasy novel Neverwhere, which imagines a magical world in the abandoned stations, to the horror film An American Werewolf in London, with its terrifying chase scene in Tottenham Court Road Station. The Tube, with its dark tunnels, strange noises, and ghost stations, is a naturally mysterious and evocative setting. It is a place that sparks the imagination, a real-world labyrinth that feels like it could easily be a gateway to other, stranger worlds. The modern specialty coffee shop, with its minimalist decor, its complex brewing equipment, and its baristas who can talk at length about tasting notes and processing methods, can sometimes feel intimidating. But at its heart, this third wave movement is about a deep respect for the coffee bean and the people who grow it. It's an attempt to reconnect the consumer with the origin of their food, to tell the story of a specific farm, a specific harvest, and a specific farmer. It's a movement that tries to bring the humanity and the history back into a global commodity. The Australian farmers in 1932 were in a desperate situation. They were facing economic ruin from the Great Depression and ecological disaster from the emu migration. Their appeal for military aid was an act of desperation. Seen in this light, the story is not just a comedy, but also a poignant tale of human struggle against overwhelming forces. The failure of the military intervention was surely a devastating blow to their morale. The story is funny from a distance, but for the people living it, it was a very serious and very difficult time. In her later years, Hedy Lamarr would spend hours on the phone with her children and friends. It was her primary means of connection to the world. It's a fascinating image. The woman whose invention helped to usher in an age of untethered mobile communication, choosing to remain tethered to a landline. Perhaps for her, the telephone was a more intimate and controlled medium, a way to connect with people on her own terms, without the intrusive gaze of the public eye that had defined so much of her life. The sheer scale of the London Underground is difficult to comprehend. With over 270 stations and 250 miles of track, it is one of the largest and busiest metro systems in the world. The daily logistical challenge of running thousands of trains, carrying millions of passengers, and maintaining the vast and aging infrastructure is a monumental feat of human organization. It is a city beneath a city, a complex organism that works tirelessly, mostly out of sight, to keep London alive and moving. The simple act of adding milk and sugar to coffee is a practice that has its own history. European drinkers in the 17th century were the first to start adding sugar, a new and expensive commodity from the colonial plantations, to counteract coffee's bitterness. The practice of adding milk came a little later, popularized in France with the café au lait. These additions transformed coffee from a harsh, medicinal drink into a more palatable and comforting beverage, helping to fuel its spread across the continent and making it the versatile drink we know today. The Great Emu War is a perfect example of a story where there are no real villains. The soldiers were just doing their job. The farmers were just trying to protect their livelihood. And the emus were just being emus, following their instincts and looking for food. The conflict arose from a simple, blameless clash of interests. This lack of malice is part of what makes the story so charming and easy to enjoy. It is a conflict without hatred, a war without an enemy, which makes its failure all the more gentle and humorous. The farmers, being ex-soldiers, petitioned the government for help. Their request was unusual. They wanted military-grade machine guns to deal with the feathered menace. The Minister for Defense, Sir George Pierce, himself a veteran, agreed. It seemed like a win-win. The farmers would get their pest control, the military would get some target practice, and it was even seen as a good public relations move. So a small contingent was dispatched from the Royal Australian Artillery. It consisted of Major G.P.W. Meredith, accompanied by 2 soldiers, Sergeant S. McMurray and Gunner J. O'Halloran. Their arsenal? 2 state-of-the-art Lewis machine guns and 10,000 rounds of ammunition. On paper, it was a ridiculously one-sided affair. 3 trained soldiers with automatic weapons versus a flock of birds. The press caught wind of it, and a Fox movie-toned cinematographer even came along to document the glorious victory. What could possibly go wrong? Heidi Lamar's story has become a powerful source of inspiration. It tells us that our contributions to the world may not be recognized in our own time, but that good ideas have a way of enduring. It is a lesson in patience and in having faith in the value of one's own work, even when no one else seems to understand it. Her story is a quiet reassurance that a life's true impact is not always measured by immediate fame or fortune, but by the legacy that unfolds long after we are gone. The London Underground's famous slogan, "The Labyrinth," was used in early advertising to convey a sense of adventure and mystery, but it also speaks to the passenger's experience. To navigate the tube is to put your trust in the system, to follow the signs and the map through a maze of tunnels and passages, believing that it will deliver you to your destination. There is a small act of faith involved in every journey, a surrender to the logic and the order of the labyrinthine network. As you settle deeper into relaxation, let the stories of the night gently fade into the background of your mind. Let the image of the defiant emus, the brilliant Heidi Lamar, the rumbling tube, and the aromatic coffee bean all blend together into a soft tapestry of history. These are not just stories from the past. They are part of the complex and fascinating world that has shaped our present. They are tales of failure, of hidden genius, of collective effort, and of quiet revolution. They are the stories that lie just beneath the surface of our everyday lives. Let your mind drift from the specifics of these tales to the gentle rhythm of the narrative. The purpose of these stories is not to be memorized or studied, but to provide a soft and soothing current for your thoughts to float upon as you drift toward sleep. History in this form is not a test. It is a gentle companion in the quiet of the night, a reminder of the endless, fascinating, and often surprising pageant of human experience. It is a vast and quiet landscape for your mind to wander through on its way to rest. The night is a time for quiet reflection, a time to let go of the day's concerns, and to sink into a state of deep and peaceful rest. The stories we have shared are simply stepping stones on that journey. They are here to occupy the busy parts of your mind, to give it something gentle to hold on to, so that the deeper parts of you can relax and recharge. Allow the sound of my voice to be a steady and comforting presence, a quiet guide leading you further and further away from wakefulness and closer to a serene and restorative sleep. So now, just let go. Let the stories dissolve into dreams. There is nothing more you need to do, nothing you need to think about. The only task that remains is to breathe, slowly and deeply, and to allow yourself the gift of rest. The world and its endless stories will be here for you when you wake. But for now, the journey is over. The night is quiet, and it is time to sleep. Good night. Narration L-I-P-S-A. Narration L-I-P-S-A. Narration L-I-P-S-A. Narration L-I-P-S-A. The first engagement took place on the 2nd of November, 1932. the soldiers spotted a flock of about 50 emus. This was it. The moment of truth. The men set up their Lewis gun, took careful aim, and waited for the birds to get into perfect range. But emus, it turns out, are not stupid. They are surprisingly cunning strategists. Before the gunner could get a clean shot at the main group, the birds, as if sensing the danger, split into smaller, more agile units, running erratically in all directions. The soldiers opened fire, the machine gun chattering across the plains, but hitting a fast-moving, unpredictable target the size of an emu from a distance proved to be incredibly difficult. After firing a significant number of rounds, the official casualty count was, to put it mildly, disappointing. A handful of birds were down, but the vast majority had simply vanished into the bush, completely unscathed. Nurashun, LIPSA. Major Meredith and his men were undeterred. They were soldiers, after all. Failure was not an option. A few days later, they planned a more sophisticated ambush. They had located a flock of over 1,000 emus near a local dam. This was their chance for a decisive victory. They set up the machine gun in a concealed position, with local farmers attempting to herd the emus into a perfectly designed kill zone. The plan was brilliant. The execution, however, was not. Just as the gunner opened fire, the Lewis gun jammed after firing only 12 rounds. Before the soldiers could fix the stoppage, the entire flock of 1,000 emus had scattered, disappearing over the horizon, leaving the soldiers standing in a cloud of dust and frustration. The cinematographer, who had been hoping for dramatic footage of a military triumph, packed his bags and left in disgust. The military campaign, which was becoming known in the press as the, quote, Emu War, continued to be a comedy of errors. In one particularly infamous incident, Major Meredith decided to mount one of the Lewis guns onto a truck. The idea was to chase the emus down, firing from the moving vehicle. It was a bold, modern approach to avian warfare. Unfortunately, the emus were far more agile off-road than the truck was. The vehicle bounced so violently over the rough terrain that the gunner couldn't aim at all. At one point, an emu running alongside the truck became entangled in the vehicle's steering mechanism, causing the driver to swerve and crash into a fence. The bird freed itself and ran off, presumably to tell its friends about the strange, noisy metal beast that couldn't even drive in a straight line. After nearly a week of this humbling fiasco, the first phase of the war was called off. The military had expended 500 rounds of ammunition to kill, by Major Meredith's own generous estimate, somewhere between 50 and 200 emus. It was a tactical and public relations disaster. One politician in the Australian Parliament wryly noted that the military's medal presentation should be to the emus who had won every round so far. The press had a field day, mocking the army's inability to defeat a bunch of birds. Yet, the farmers' problems persisted, and under immense pressure, the Minister for Defense authorized a second attempt a few days later. This time, Major Meredith claimed, they would be more successful. They had learned from their mistakes. They now understood the enemy's tactics. The second campaign did yield slightly better results, if you can call them that. Major Meredith reported killing nearly 1,000 emus over the course of a month, using almost 10,000 rounds of ammunition. This means it took, on average, 10 bullets to kill a single emu. It was hardly an efficient operation. By December, Meredith was recalled and the war was officially over. The military concluded that it was not a cost-effective method of pest control. The emus, despite their losses, remained a significant problem for years to come. In the end, the government found a more effective, if less dramatic, solution. They offered bounties for emu skins and built extensive barrier fences. The Great Emu War passed into legend, a perfect and very real historical example of how human arrogance and technology can be thoroughly outmaneuvered by nature's simple, stubborn resilience. It's a wonderfully absurd story that reminds us that history isn't always about great kings and epic battles. Sometimes it's about a group of very serious men with very big guns being completely and utterly humiliated by a flock of very large, very fast birds. It's a footnote in the grand scheme of things, but a delightful one. It serves as a soothing reminder that even the best-laid plans can go horribly, hilariously wrong, and that sometimes the universe has a very dry sense of humor. The emus, for their part, just kept on being emus, blissfully unaware that they had won a war against the full might of the Australian military. They simply wanted to find a good meal, and in doing so they etched their names into the annals of bizarre military history forever. From the sun-baked absurdity of the Australian outback, let's now pivot to the cool, intoxicating glamour of old Hollywood, and to a woman who lived a life so extraordinary it sounds like fiction. Her story is one of profound, almost dizzying contrast. She was known to the world as one of the most beautiful women to ever grace the silver screen, a symbol of European exoticism and allure. But behind the carefully constructed facade of a Hollywood goddess was a mind of astonishing brilliance, an inventor whose work would lay the foundation for some of the most essential technologies we use every single day. Her name was Heidi Lamar, and her story is a powerful lesson in not judging a book by its very, very glamorous cover. She was proof that intellect and beauty are not mutually exclusive, a fact that her own era struggled to comprehend. Let's start with our hook. What was a night out really like in the Roaring Twenties? Forget the romanticized movies for a moment, let's place you right there. The evening begins not with a grand entrance, but with a quiet, almost nervous energy. Born Hedwig Eva Maria Kiesler in Vienna, Austria in 1914, she was the only child of a wealthy, assimilated Jewish family. Her father, a bank director, was a man of immense curiosity who would take his young daughter on long walks, explaining the inner workings of everything from streetcars to the printing press. He nurtured her inquisitive mind, encouraging her to see the world not just for what it was, but for how it worked. This early education in mechanics and systems thinking would become profoundly important later in her life. But as a young woman, her stunning beauty quickly overshadowed her intellect in the eyes of the world. She embarked on an acting career and gained international notoriety for her role in the controversial 1933 film Ecstasy, a film that was scandalous for its time. Her life took a dark turn when she married Friedrich Mandl, a wealthy Austrian arms manufacturer who was, to put it mildly, the villain in this part of her story. He was intensely controlling and possessive, a man who sold weapons to the fascist governments of Italy and Germany. He treated Heidi like a trophy, forbidding her from continuing her acting career and keeping her a virtual prisoner in their castle. However, he also made a critical mistake. He would often bring her to his business meetings with scientists and military technicians, believing his beautiful young wife was too unintelligent to understand their discussions about advanced weaponry. He was wrong. Heidi, with the mind her father had cultivated, listened intently. She absorbed every detail about guided torpedoes, remote control systems, and the complex problems of radio signal interference. In 1937, Heidi Lamar executed a daring escape from her husband and her gilded cage. The details are the stuff of legend. Some stories say she disguised herself as her own maid and fled to Paris. From there, she made her way to London, where she met Louis B. Mayer, the head of MGM Studios. He saw her star potential, gave her the new name Heidi Lamar, and brought her to Hollywood. She was an instant sensation. She starred alongside the biggest names of the era, like Clark Gable and Spencer Tracy, and was marketed as the epitome of glamour. But while Hollywood was obsessed with her face, Heidi was growing increasingly bored and frustrated. She found the acting role shallow and the Hollywood lifestyle unfulfilling. In her downtime, in her trailer between takes, she didn't read gossip magazines. She tinkered. She worked on inventions. As World War II escalated, Heidi was horrified by the news coming out of Europe and desperate to contribute to the Allied war effort. She knew that her former husband was working with the Nazis, and she had a deep, personal understanding of their military technology. She was particularly troubled by the problem of radio-controlled torpedoes. The technology was promising, but it was easily thwarted. An enemy could simply find the frequency being used to guide the torpedo and jam it, sending the weapon off course. Heidi believed she had a solution, a way to make the guidance signal unjammable. Her idea was inspired not by military tactics, but by something far more delicate, a player piano. She envisioned a system where the radio frequency would constantly and randomly change, hopping from one frequency to another in a predetermined, synchronized pattern. The transmitter in the ship and the receiver in the torpedo would be synchronized, like two-player pianos, using the same paper roll, making it impossible for an enemy to find and jam the signal. It was a revolutionary concept she called frequency hopping. But she wasn't a trained engineer, and she needed help to turn her brilliant idea into a workable device. She found an unlikely collaborator in George Antheil, an avant-garde composer and musician known for creating bizarre, complex symphonies using multiple-player pianos. He understood the mechanics of synchronization perfectly. Together, in Heidi's living room, they worked out the details, using a miniature player piano mechanism to represent the frequency changes. In 1942, they were granted a patent for their secret communication system. It was a work of genius, born from a Hollywood starlet and a modernist composer. Brimming with patriotic fervor, Hedy Lamarr presented her patent to the U.S. Navy. This, she believed, was how she could truly help win the war. The Navy's response was to be charitable, dismissive. They looked at Hedy Lamarr, the glamorous movie star, and couldn't see the brilliant inventor. The technology seemed too complex, and the idea of implementing a mechanism based on player pianos inside a torpedo was deemed unfeasible. They essentially patted her on the head and told her that if she really wanted to help the war effort, she should use her famous face to sell war bonds. And so she did. She went on a national tour, raising millions of dollars for the Allies, all while her revolutionary invention, a technology that could have saved countless lives, sat on a shelf, collecting dust. For decades, her invention was forgotten. Heidi's Hollywood career eventually faded, and she became increasingly reclusive, her story taking a sad turn as she struggled with legal troubles and botched plastic surgeries. The world remembered her as a beautiful face from a bygone era, a tragic star whose light had dimmed. But history and technology has a long memory. Her patent expired without her ever earning a dime from it. However, in the late 1950s, engineers at Sylvania rediscovered the concept of frequency hopping. They began developing the technology, and it was first used on naval ships during the Cuban Missile Crisis in 1962. It was the beginning of spread-spectrum technology, the very foundation of the modern digital world. Heidi's idea was no longer just a secret communication system. It was the future. It wasn't until the 1990s, near the end of her life, that the world finally began to recognize Hedy Lamarr's incredible contribution to science and technology. As the digital age dawned, it became clear that her frequency hopping concept was a core component of countless wireless technologies. It's in the Wi-Fi that connects you to the internet, the Bluetooth that connects your phone to your headphones, and the GPS that guides you to your destination. Her invention, born in a Hollywood living room and dismissed by the establishment, is now an invisible, indispensable part of our daily lives. In 1997, she and George Antheil were finally honored with the Electronic Frontier Foundation's Pioneer Award. Hedy, then in her 80s and a recluse, responded with her characteristic wit. When told of the award, her only comment was, "Well, it's about time." Hedy Lamarr passed away in 2000. Her story is a poignant and powerful reminder of the hidden depths people can possess. She was trapped by her own beauty, her intellect dismissed and overlooked by a world that couldn't see past her flawless face. Yet, her legacy is not just in the classic films she starred in, but in the very airwaves around us. She was a true visionary, a woman who saw the world differently, as a system to be understood and improved. Her life is a quiet testament to the idea that the most revolutionary ideas can come from the most unexpected places, and that true genius can often be found hiding in plain sight, waiting patiently for the world to catch up. So the next time you connect to a Wi-Fi network, spare a thought for the glamorous movie star who made it all possible. From the hidden genius of a single person, we now turn our attention to the collective genius of a city, and to a monumental feat of engineering that transformed not just a metropolis, but the very idea of urban life. Let's travel to 19th century London. It was, at the time, the largest and most powerful city on Earth, the heart of a vast global empire. But on the ground, it was a city choking on its own success. The streets were a chaotic, gridlocked nightmare, a tangled mess of horse-drawn omnibuses, carriages, carts, and pedestrians. A journey of just a few miles could take hours. The city was suffering from a crippling case of congestion, and a radical, almost unthinkable solution was needed. The idea that emerged was audacious, terrifying, and brilliant. If you can't go over or through the city, you must go under it. You are in your small apartment. The air is thick with the smell of face powder and the faint, sweet scent of illicit perfume. The light is low, casting long shadows as you adjust the fit of your new dress. The proposal was to build the world's first underground railway. To the Victorian mind, this was the stuff of science fiction. or perhaps a descent into the underworld. The press mocked it, calling it a sewer railway. The clergy preached against it, warning that burrowing into the earth was an affront to God and would surely disturb the devil. People were genuinely afraid that the tunnels would collapse, that buildings would fall into them, or that passengers would be asphyxiated by the foul, subterranean air. But a visionary solicitor named Charles Pearson championed the idea relentlessly. He saw it not just as a solution to traffic, but as a social project, a way to allow the city's poor to move out of the squalid, overcrowded slums of the inner city and into healthier suburbs. Commuting to work on this new iron spine, construction began in 1860 on the Metropolitan Railway. The method they used was called cut and cover. It was as brutally simple as it sounds. They would dig a massive trench down the middle of an existing street, lay the railway tracks at the bottom, build a brick arch over the top to form the tunnel, and then cover it all back up again. It was incredibly disruptive. Entire streets were closed for months, even years. The noise was deafening. The dust was choking, and the process involved diverting sewers, gas lines, and water mains. It was open-heart surgery on the city. Entire buildings had to be demolished to make way for the trench. The project was a constant battle against the soft, wet London clay and the maze of infrastructure that already existed just beneath the surface. It was a chaotic, muddy, and dangerous undertaking. On January 10, 1863, the Metropolitan Railway opened to the public. It ran for just under 4 miles, from Paddington to Farringdon. Despite all the fears and skepticism, it was an immediate and overwhelming success. On its first day, 38,000 people queued up, eager to experience this modern marvel. They descended the staircases into stations that were surprisingly grand, with high, vaulted ceilings and natural light pouring in from ventilation shafts. But the journey itself was an assault on the senses. The trains were steam locomotives, which meant the tunnels were filled with thick, sulfurous smoke and steam. The railway company tried to use special engines designed to, quote, consume their own smoke, but they weren't very effective. The air was hot, acrid, and difficult to breathe. Passengers would emerge from their subterranean journey covered in a fine layer of soot, their eyes watering and their throats sore. Yet, they loved it. It was fast, it was efficient, and it was a novelty. It was the future. The success of the first line sparked a frenzy of underground railway construction. Rival companies sprang up, each wanting to build their own line, creating a complex and often disconnected web of tunnels beneath the city. This initial phase was all cut and cover, limited to following the paths of existing streets. But a new technology was about to arrive that would allow engineers to go deeper and to burrow anywhere they pleased, fundamentally changing the nature of the underground and the city above it. This new method would give the system its famous nickname, the tube. The innovation was the combination of two key technologies, the Great Head Shield and the electric locomotive. The Great Head Shield was a large, cylindrical iron shield that could be pushed forward through the soft London clay, allowing workers to excavate the tunnel from within the safety of the shield itself, lining the newly bored tunnel with cast iron rings as they went. This meant they could now dig deep-level tunnels far below the existing foundations and sewers, without causing any disruption on the surface. But these deep tunnels couldn't be ventilated like the shallow cut-and-cover lines. Steam trains were out of the question. The solution was electricity. The City and South London Railway, which opened in 1890, was the world's first deep-level electric railway. Its small padded carriages were nicknamed padded cells by passengers, and with no windows, the journey was a slightly claustrophobic experience. The early 20th century was the golden age of the tube's expansion. An American transport magnate named Charles Yerkes consolidated most of the competing lines into one company, creating a more unified system. It was under his leadership that the Underground developed its powerful and enduring brand identity. He hired the architect Leslie Green, who designed the iconic oxblood red-tiled stations that are still recognizable today. He commissioned the calligrapher Edward Johnston to create a clean, simple, and instantly legible typeface for all the signage, a typeface that is still in use. And most famously, in 1931, an engineering draftsman named Harry Beck created a revolutionary new map. He realized that passengers didn't need geographical accuracy, they needed clarity. He designed a schematic circuit diagram-like map that straightened the lines, spaced the stations evenly, and used color coding. It was a masterpiece of information design that became the standard for transit maps around the world. The London Underground became more than just a transportation system. It became woven into the fabric of the city's identity. But its most profound and heroic chapter came during World War II. As the Blitz rained bombs down on London, the deep-level tube stations were transformed into the city's largest public air raid shelters. Londoners would descend deep underground each night, carrying blankets and flasks of tea. They slept on the platforms, their beds laid out on the cold concrete. Underground libraries were set up, and concerts were held. In these subterranean spaces, a unique and resilient community spirit flourished. The tube, which was built to move people, now served to protect them, becoming a symbol of the city's defiance and its will to survive. It was a dark, frightening time, but the shared experience forged an unbreakable bond between Londoners and their underground. After the war, the underground continued to evolve, expanding further into the suburbs and modernizing its lines and rolling stock. It has faced challenges, from fires to acts of terrorism, but it has always endured, a constant and reliable presence in the life of the ever-changing city. Today, it carries over 1 billion passengers a year, a vast, intricate network that functions as the city's circulatory system. It is a living museum of engineering, design, and social history. Riding the tube is to travel through time. You can still see the grand Victorian arches of the original Metropolitan line, the iconic red tiles of the early 20th century, and the futuristic, gleaming stations of the newest lines. It is a testament to the Victorian ambition that built it, the modernist design that defined it, and the quiet resilience that saw it through its darkest days. The story of the London Underground is the story of London itself. It's a narrative of overcoming immense challenges, of innovation born from necessity, and of the constant, unending process of a city remaking itself. It's a reminder that beneath the surface of our modern world lie incredible stories of human ingenuity and perseverance. It started as a mad, impossible idea, a railway that ran through the dark, a journey into the unknown, but it grew to become the reliable, beating heart of one of the world's great cities, a symbol of connection, endurance, and the simple, everyday miracle of getting from one place to another, quietly and efficiently, deep beneath the bustling streets. For our final story tonight, let's turn our attention from the grand structures we build to a simple, humble thing we consume. It's a story about a small, roasted bean that sparked a global revolution, fueling minds, inspiring ideas, and creating new social spaces that would change the course of history. It's a substance so ingrained in our daily routines that we often forget it has a dramatic, centuries-long story of its own. A journey filled with myth, trade, controversy, and conquest. This is the history of coffee, and it begins, as many great stories do, with a legend involving some unusually energetic goats. It's a tale that takes us from the highlands of ancient Ethiopia to the bustling cafes of modern life. It's shorter than anything your mother would have approved of, a straight-line chemise that shimmers with beads. It feels both liberating and scandalous. The stockings are silk, a true luxury, held up by a garter. Everything feels like a statement. According to the most popular origin myth, the story begins around the 9th century in the kingdom of Kaffa in Ethiopia. A goat herder named Kaldi noticed that his flock became incredibly energetic and seemed to dance after eating the bright red berries from a particular bush. Curious, Kaldi tried the berries himself and felt a similar wave of exhilarating alertness. He took his discovery to a local monastery, presenting the mysterious berries to the abbot. The abbot, however, was suspicious of their powerful effect and declared them to be the work of the devil, throwing them into a fire. But as the beans roasted in the flames, they released a beautiful, enticing aroma. The monks raked the roasted beans from the embers, ground them up, and, in a moment of inspiration, dissolved them in hot water, creating the world's first cup of coffee. They found the drink helped them stay awake and alert during their long hours of evening prayer. While the story of Kaldi and his dancing goats is likely just a charming legend, we do know that coffee cultivation and trade began on the Arabian Peninsula. By the 15th century, coffee was being cultivated in the Yemeni district of Arabia, and from the port of Mocha, it began its journey across the Muslim world. It was particularly popular among Sufi mystics, who used the drink to aid in their religious rituals and stay awake for their devotional ceremonies. Soon, it spread beyond the monasteries and into the public sphere with the rise of a brand new institution, the coffee house. These places, known as kafekhane, sprang up in cities across the Near East, like Mecca, Cairo, and Damascus. They were revolutionary spaces, unlike the taverns of Europe. These early coffee houses were not places for intoxication but for stimulation. They became vibrant centers of social and intellectual life. For the price of a cup of coffee, you could sit for hours, listen to music, watch performances, play chess, and, most importantly, engage in conversation. People from all walks of life would gather to discuss news, politics, and ideas. For this reason, they became known as schools of the wise. Rulers and religious authorities, however, were often suspicious of these establishments. They saw them as breeding grounds for political dissent and idle gossip. Several attempts were made to ban coffee and shut down the coffee houses. But the public's love for the drink and the social life that surrounded it was too strong. The bans never lasted long, and the coffee house culture continued to thrive. By the 17th century, coffee had made its way to Europe, brought by Venetian merchants who traded extensively with the Near East. At first, it was treated with suspicion, just as it had been in the Arab world. Some called it the, quote, bitter invention of Satan. The controversy was so great that it was brought before Pope Clement VIII. His advisors pressured him to condemn the Muslim drink, but the Pope decided to taste it for himself first. He found it so delicious that he reportedly baptized it, declaring that it would be a shame to let the infidels have exclusive use of it. With the papal seal of approval, coffee's popularity in Europe exploded. Coffee houses began to appear in major cities like Venice, London, Paris, and Vienna, each developing its own unique character. In England, coffee houses became known as, quote, penny universities. For the price of a penny, which bought you a cup of coffee, you could gain access to a world of information and debate. Patrons would read the latest pamphlets and newspapers, conduct business, and engage in vigorous intellectual discussion. Different coffee houses catered to different clientele. Some were frequented by writers and poets, others by scientists, and still others by merchants and stockbrokers. In fact, the famous insurance market Lloyd's of London and the London Stock Exchange both began their lives as humble coffee shops where merchants would meet to make deals. These establishments were crucial to the intellectual and commercial ferment of the Age of Enlightenment. They were the internet cafes of their day. The demand for coffee was insatiable, but the Arabs fiercely guarded their monopoly on its cultivation. They would boil or parch the beans before export to ensure that no fertile seeds could be smuggled out of the country. The story of how coffee cultivation spread beyond Arabia is one of industrial espionage and daring theft. According to one legend, an Indian Sufi pilgrim named Baba Budan strapped 7 fertile coffee seeds to his stomach and smuggled them out of Mecca. Another, more historically verified story involves the Dutch, who managed to steal some coffee plants in the late 17th century. They began cultivating coffee in their colonies in Java and Ceylon, which is why Java became a popular nickname for the drink. The French were next, with a naval officer named Gabriel de Clou undertaking a perilous journey to transport a single precious coffee seedling to the Caribbean island of Martinique. De Clou's journey is a tale of incredible dedication. He protected his seedling from pirates, storms, and a jealous fellow passenger who tried to sabotage it. When the ship was becalmed and water was rationed, he shared his own meager water allowance with the plant to keep it alive. From this single seedling, it's said that much of the coffee cultivation in the Caribbean, Central, and South America originated. The plant thrived in the New World's climate, and Brazil, in particular, would go on to become the world's coffee superpower. This global spread, however, has a dark side. The immense profitability of coffee fueled the colonial system and was deeply intertwined with the brutal institution of slavery, with enslaved people forced to labor on the vast coffee plantations that sprang up across the Americas. Over the centuries, coffee became a truly global commodity, and different cultures developed their own unique rituals for preparing and drinking it. There's the strong, thick Turkish coffee boiled with sugar and cardamom, the elegant Italian espresso, a quick, intense shot of pure coffee flavor, the French café au lait, a morning ritual of coffee mixed with hot milk, served in a large bowl, and the American tradition of drip coffee, a lighter brew designed for leisurely consumption. The invention of instant coffee in the early 20th century made the drink more accessible than ever before. and the rise of global coffeehouse chains in the late 20th century transformed it from a simple beverage into a lifestyle brand. Today, coffee is the second most traded commodity in the world, after oil. It is an engine of the global economy and an indispensable part of the daily lives of billions of people. Its story is a microcosm of world history, a tale of trade, religion, politics, science, and culture. It's a story about how a simple plant from the highlands of Ethiopia could be discovered by a goat herder, fuel the minds of the Enlightenment, create new social institutions, and become a symbol of modern life. It's a reminder that the most ordinary things in our lives often have the most extraordinary histories. So as you drift off to sleep, perhaps you can appreciate the long, winding journey that brought that humble, powerful being from a distant past into the quiet of our present moment. As we let that story settle, let's return for a moment to the vast, open spaces of Australia and to the aftermath of the Great Emu War. The military's withdrawal did not, of course, mean the end of the conflict between farmers and emus. It simply marked the end of the formal, state-sponsored campaign. The emus, having successfully defended their access to the farmers' wheat fields, continued to be a significant agricultural pest. The government, having learned that machine guns were a surprisingly inefficient and expensive tool for bird control, shifted its strategy. The new approach was far less dramatic, but ultimately more effective. It was a war of attrition, fought not by soldiers, but by the farmers themselves, incentivized by a new system of bounties. This marked a privatization of the war effort, turning a national military operation into a local economic one. Out on the street, the city buzzes with a new kind of energy. The air is a cocktail of coal smoke, exhaust from a Ford Model T sputtering by, and roasting peanuts from a street vendor. The sounds are a symphony of clanging trolleys and distant jazz. The government offered a price for each emu killed, and a robust system of fences like the famous rabbit-proof fence was expanded and reinforced to create barriers to the emus' migratory paths. Over the next several years, this combination of bounties and fencing proved to be a far more successful long-term strategy. Tens of thousands of emus were culled by farmers and bounty hunters. It was a slower, grimmer, and less newsworthy conflict than the War of 1932, but it gradually brought the pest problem under control. The Great Emu War itself, however, lived on in the public imagination. It became a piece of Australian folklore, a source of national amusement and a cautionary tale. It's a story that is often told with a sense of dry, self-deprecating humor, a classic example of Aussie battler spirit being thwarted by the sheer stubborn unpredictability of the Australian continent and its wildlife. The legacy of the Great Emu War is a curious one. It highlights the folly of applying brute force military solutions to complex ecological problems. The image of trained soldiers with Lewis guns being outmaneuvered by flocks of birds is a powerful symbol of nature's ability to defy human attempts at control. It also serves as a strange and comforting reminder that history is not just a sequence of serious and momentous events. It is also filled with moments of utter absurdity, of plans gone comically awry, and of humbling encounters with the natural world. In a way, the emu's victory was a small but significant check on human hubris. They didn't win through strategy or malice. They won simply by being themselves. Fast, unpredictable, and perfectly adapted to their environment in a way the soldiers and their truck-mounted machine guns simply were not. Now let's return to the world of Heidi Lamar and consider the years after she presented her groundbreaking invention to an indifferent Navy. While her secret communication system was shelved, her life in Hollywood continued. She was a major star throughout the 1940s, appearing in films like Ziegfeld Girl and Samson and Delilah. On the surface, she was living the dream. She was wealthy, famous, and universally admired for her beauty. But privately, the frustration of being intellectually stifled grew. She tried to pitch other inventions, including a tablet that would dissolve in water to create a carbonated drink, but it was a failure. The world wanted Heidi Lamar the movie star, not Heidi Lamar the inventor. She was typecast not just in her film roles but in life itself, trapped in the persona that Hollywood had created for her. As her film career began to decline in the 1950s, Heidi's life became more challenging. She went through a series of marriages and divorces, and her attempts to produce her own films were met with little success. The public, which had once adored her, began to see her as a fading star, a relic of a past era. She became increasingly reclusive, retreating from the spotlight that had both made her and, in a way, imprisoned her. Her story in these years is a poignant one, a narrative of a brilliant mind struggling against the narrow expectations of her time. The same world that celebrated her for her superficial qualities was completely blind to her true genius. Her greatest contribution to the world remained a secret, a forgotten patent in a government archive, while she was remembered for the roles she played rather than the world she helped to shape. The rediscovery of her work in the later part of the 20th century was a slow and gradual process. It wasn't a single aha moment, but a growing realization among engineers and tech historians that the principles of modern spread-spectrum communication had a surprising and glamorous origin. As the technologies for Wi-Fi and Bluetooth were being developed, researchers traced the lineage of the core ideas back to that 1942 patent by Heidi Keesler-Markey, her married name at the time, and George Antheil. It was a shocking revelation. The beautiful actress from Hollywood's golden age was, in fact, a pioneer of wireless technology. It was a fact so unexpected, so counter to the established narrative of her life, that it took time for it to be fully accepted and celebrated. For Heidi, this late-life recognition was bittersweet. When she was finally honored for her invention in the 1990s, Hedy Lamarr had long since withdrawn from public life. She rarely left her home and communicated with the world primarily by telephone. She didn't attend the award ceremonies or give interviews. Her famous response, "It's about time," was delivered over the phone, a testament to her wry and perhaps slightly wounded pride. She had waited over half a century for her intellectual contributions to be acknowledged. The honor was a vindication, but it came too late to change the trajectory of her life or career. She passed away in 2000, and her will requested that her ashes be scattered in the Vienna woods of her native Austria. A final return home for a woman who had lived such an extraordinary and multifaceted life far from where she began. The ultimate legacy of Heidi Lamarr is a powerful and inspiring one. She is now celebrated not just as an icon of beauty, but as an icon of invention, a role model for women in STEM fields. Her story has been retold in books, documentaries, and plays, each one working to correct the historical record and give her intellect the credit it was denied for so long. She serves as a crucial reminder that genius can be found anywhere, and that we should never underestimate someone based on their appearance, their gender, or their profession. Her life was a testament to the power of curiosity, the kind her father instilled in her on those long walks in Vienna. She never stopped looking at the world and wondering how it could be made to work better, even when no one was willing to listen. Let's now journey back down into the deep, dark tunnels of the London Underground. After the heroic chapter of World War II, the system entered a new phase of its life. The post-war era was one of reconstruction and expansion. London was growing, and the tube had to grow with it. One of the most ambitious projects of this period was the construction of the Victoria Line. Opened in stages between 1968 and 1971, it was the first entirely new deep-level line to be built across central London in over 60 years. It was a marvel of modern engineering, designed for maximum efficiency. The line was planned to relieve congestion on other lines and was routed to connect several major railway terminals. It also incorporated innovative design features, such as automatic train operation, which was highly advanced for its time. The design of the Victoria Line stations also set a new standard. Each station was given its own unique, tiled motif in the seating recesses on the platform. These designs were meant to be a visual clue to the station's identity, a quick, recognizable symbol for hurried passengers. At Brixton, the motif is a ton of bricks, a pun on the name. At Euston, it's an arch reminiscent of the old Euston Station. At Pimlico, it features a pattern of yellow dots, inspired by a modern art painting at the nearby Tate Gallery. This small but thoughtful detail shows a commitment to user experience and a sense of playfulness in design that has become a beloved feature of the line. It was a continuation of the Underground's long tradition of blending great engineering with great design. The latter half of the 20th century also brought new challenges. The King's Crossfire in 1987 was a terrible tragedy that claimed 31 lives. It began with a discarded match falling onto a wooden escalator, and the resulting fire swept through the ticket hall with horrifying speed. The disaster exposed serious safety flaws in the aging system and led to a massive overhaul of safety regulations. Wooden escalators were replaced, smoking was completely banned throughout the system, and new fire safety measures were implemented. It was a dark moment in the Underground's history, but it led to a safer system for future generations of passengers. It was a painful lesson in the constant need for vigilance and modernization in such a complex, high-traffic environment. Your destination isn't marked by a flashing sign. It's an anonymous-looking door in a quiet alley, maybe below a tailor's shop or behind a laundromat. This is the era of prohibition, and socializing is now an act of civil disobedience. The turn of the 21st century saw another monumental expansion project, the Jubilee Line extension. Opened in 1999, just in time for the new millennium, this extension was an architectural showcase. The new stations, designed by a host of world-renowned architects, were vast, cathedral-like spaces of concrete, glass, and steel. Stations like Westminster, with its dramatic deep-level caverns, and Canary Wharf, with its massive, light-filled entrance, were celebrated as triumphs of modern architecture. The extension was also a statement of intent, a project designed to regenerate the former docklands of East London and connect them to the heart of the city. It was a bold, futuristic vision that demonstrated the Underground's continuing importance as a driver of urban development. Perhaps the most iconic symbol of the Underground, besides the map itself, is the roundel, the simple red circle with a blue bar across the middle. Its origins date back to the early 20th century, and it was designed to make station names stand out amidst the visual clutter of advertising posters. It has since become one of the most recognized and enduring corporate logos in the world. It is a symbol not just of the transport system, but of London itself. It appears on t-shirts, mugs, and souvenirs, a piece of branding that has transcended its original purpose to become a cultural icon. The phrase, "Mind the gap," an automated warning first introduced in 1969, has similarly entered the global lexicon. A simple, practical instruction that has become a beloved and quirky piece of London's auditory landscape. The London Underground is more than just a network of tunnels and trains. It's a social space, a microcosm of the city above. It's a place of quiet, unspoken rules. You stand on the right on the escalators. You avoid eye contact. You give up your seat for someone who needs it more. It's a place where the incredible diversity of London is on full display, as people from all corners of the globe share a space for a few moments on their journey. It is a great equalizer. For the duration of the ride, everyone, from the banker to the student, is just a passenger. It continues to be the reliable, rumbling, beating heart of the city, a testament to the idea that sometimes the most profound journeys are the ones we take every day, deep beneath the ground. Let's now return to our final story, the journey of coffee, and trace its path across the Atlantic to the Americas. While the French and Dutch were establishing coffee plantations in their Caribbean and South American colonies, the British colonies in North America were still primarily tea-drinking territories. That all began to change with a single, iconic act of political protest. In 1773, a group of American colonists, frustrated with British taxation, staged the Boston Tea Party, dumping an entire shipment of tea from the East India Company into Boston Harbor. This act made drinking tea a symbol of loyalty to the British Crown. As a result, switching to coffee became a patriotic duty, a statement of support for the revolution. John Adams himself wrote that tea had become a, quote, trader's drink. The American coffee industry was born from this act of rebellion. Throughout the 19th century, coffee's popularity in the United States continued to grow. The American West was won, in part, on coffee. Cowboys on long cattle drives would brew strong, gritty coffee over an open fire, a drink that came to be known as cowboy coffee. During the Civil War, coffee was an essential ration for soldiers on both sides. It provided a much-needed boost of energy and morale. Soldiers would roast their own green coffee beans and brew them in any way they could. Access to coffee became a strategic advantage, and Union blockades of southern ports often led to severe coffee shortages in the Confederacy, where soldiers had to resort to brewing ersatz coffee from chicory, acorns, or corn. The late 19th and early 20th centuries saw the rise of major American coffee brands. Entrepreneurs like the Arbuckle brothers in Pittsburgh revolutionized the industry by selling pre-roasted coffee beans in 1-pound paper bags. making it much more convenient for the average household. They even included a stick of peppermint candy in each bag. Other brands, like Folgers and Maxwell House, developed their own blends and marketing slogans that became household names. Maxwell House's slogan, "Good to the last drop," was supposedly coined by President Theodore Roosevelt. Coffee was becoming an integral part of the American home and the American identity, a symbol of hospitality, hard work, and the morning ritual. The 20th century also brought significant technological innovations in coffee preparation. The invention of the espresso machine in Italy at the beginning of the century would eventually lead to a whole new coffee culture. But for much of the century, the dominant brewing methods in America were the percolator and, later, the automatic drip coffee maker. These machines made it easy to brew large pots of coffee, cementing the drink's place in office break rooms and diners across the country. This was the era of the bottomless cup, a symbol of American abundance and casual dining. However, this focus on mass production and convenience often came at the expense of quality, leading to a period where much of the coffee consumed was weak and uninspired. A coffee renaissance began in the latter half of the 20th century, often referred to as the second wave of coffee. It started in the 1960s on the West Coast, with pioneers like Peet's Coffee and Tea in Berkeley, California. They championed high-quality, dark-roasted Arabica beans and educated their customers about the different origins and flavor profiles of coffee. This movement was a reaction against the bland, mass-market coffee that had become the norm. It was about treating coffee not just as a caffeine delivery system, but as an artisanal product, like fine wine. This movement laid the groundwork for the explosion of specialty coffee culture that would follow. It was the beginning of a shift from coffee as a commodity to coffee as a craft. This second wave reached its zenith with the global expansion of Starbucks. Starting as a single store in Seattle in 1971 that sold high-quality coffee beans, Starbucks transformed the coffeehouse experience. They introduced Italian-style espresso drinks like the latte and cappuccino to the American mainstream, created a comfortable third-place environment between home and work, and turned the simple act of buying a coffee into a daily ritual and a status symbol. While sometimes criticized for its homogeneity, Starbucks undeniably changed the world's relationship with coffee, raising consumer expectations for quality and creating a global language of coffee-based drinks. The very vocabulary of coffee, grande, venti, frappuccino, entered the popular lexicon. Today, we are said to be in the third wave of coffee. This movement takes the focus on quality even further. It's characterized by a deep interest in the entire supply chain, from the specific farm and even the specific lot of coffee beans, to the processing method, the roasting profile, and the precise brewing technique. Third-wave coffee shops often feature single-origin beans, lighter roasts that highlight the unique flavors of the coffee itself, and a variety of manual brewing methods, like pour-over or AeroPress. It's a hyper-specialized, almost scientific approach to coffee, treating it with the reverence and complexity once reserved for sommeliers discussing wine. It's a movement that brings the story of coffee full circle, back to a focus on the unique characteristics of a specific plant from a specific place on Earth. You give a specific knock. A small slot slides open and a pair of suspicious eyes peer out. You whisper the password. Maybe it's giggle water, or the cat's meow. The eyes linger for a moment, then the heavy door groans open. From a legendary goat herder in Ethiopia to a third-wave barista in Brooklyn, the journey of coffee is a testament to its enduring power. It has been a catalyst for social change, a fuel for intellectual revolutions, a symbol of rebellion, and a driver of the global economy. It has been both a force for connection in the coffee houses of London and a source of exploitation on the plantations of Brazil. Its history is as rich, complex, and sometimes as bitter as the drink itself. It's a humble beverage that has shaped our world in countless, often invisible ways. It's the drink that wakes us up, that brings us together, and that carries within it a story that spans 1,000 years and the entire globe. Let's take a final, reflective look at the Great Emu War. What makes this peculiar footnote in history so endlessly fascinating? Perhaps it's the David and Goliath nature of the story, but with the roles amusingly reversed. Here, the Goliath is the organized, technologically superior human force, and David is the seemingly primitive, disorganized flock of birds. The emus' victory wasn't achieved through conscious strategy but through their inherent nature. Their chaotic, unpredictable movements were a more effective defense against the rigid, systematic logic of machine gun warfare than any planned tactic could have been. It's a perfect illustration of how asymmetrical conflict can yield surprising results. The army was prepared to fight a conventional war, but the emus refused to play by the rules, because they didn't know there were any. The story also serves as a wonderful piece of political satire, even if unintentionally. The image of government officials earnestly debating the emu menace in Parliament, the dispatching of soldiers under a major's command, the issuing of official communiques about the progress of the war, it all has the air of a Monty Python sketch. It reveals the sometimes absurd lengths to which bureaucracies will go to appear decisive and in control, even when faced with a problem that is fundamentally not a military one. The war was, in many ways, a performance of state power, a performance that ended up being a farce. The government tried to solve an agricultural problem with military hardware, and the result was a lesson in the importance of using the right tool for the job. In the end, the Great Emu War is a deeply human story. It's a story about failure, and the humbling realization that we are not always the masters of our domain. The soldiers and farmers were not evil or incompetent, they were simply men trying to solve a problem with the tools they had and the mindset they'd been given. Their failure is relatable. We've all had moments where a seemingly simple task becomes impossibly complex, where our best-laid plans unravel in the face of unforeseen circumstances. The story allows us to laugh at the absurdity of the situation without malice, to find a gentle humor in the fallibility of human endeavors. It's a soothing thought in a way that even a national army can be flummoxed by something as simple and profound as the wildness of nature. Shifting back to Heidi Lamar, her enduring legacy forces us to confront our own biases. How many other brilliant minds have been overlooked throughout history because they didn't fit our preconceived notions of what a genius should look like? Heidi's story is a powerful argument for the diversity of intellect. She was not a formally trained scientist, but she had a uniquely creative and observant mind. Her solution to the torpedo problem came from an unexpected place, the world of music and player pianos. It was a beautiful example of interdisciplinary thinking, of connecting ideas from two seemingly unrelated fields to create something entirely new. This kind of innovative leap is often made by outsiders who are not bound by the conventional thinking of a particular discipline. It's also worth reflecting on the quiet tragedy of her story. Imagine the frustration of holding a world-changing idea in your mind, of knowing you have a solution that could save lives, only to be told to go and sell kisses for war bonds instead. The psychological toll of being so profoundly misunderstood must have been immense. Her later reclusiveness can be seen not just as the behavior of an aging star, but perhaps as a defense mechanism, a retreat from a world that had celebrated her for the wrong reasons and rejected her for the right ones. Her story is a cautionary tale about the damage that can be done by stereotypes and the immense human potential that can be wasted when we fail to see beyond the surface. Yet, the ultimate triumph of her story is that her idea was simply too good to remain buried forever. Genius has a way of finding the light, even if it takes decades. The fact that her frequency-hopping concept is now fundamental to our modern way of life is a testament to the power and elegance of her thinking. She didn't get the fame or the fortune that she deserved for her invention during her lifetime, but she did achieve a form of technological immortality. Her mind, her way of seeing the world, is embedded in the invisible infrastructure that connects us all. It's a quiet, profound legacy that ultimately speaks louder than any Hollywood headline ever could. She was, in the end, a builder of the modern world, hiding in plain sight. Returning once more to the London Underground, its story is also one of ghosts and forgotten histories. Beneath the city lie not just the active tube lines, but a network of ghost stations. Stations that were closed down over the years due to lack of use or rerouting of lines. Stations like Aldwych, Down Street, and Brompton Road still exist in the dark, perfectly preserved time capsules from another era. Down Street was famously used during World War II as a secure bunker for Prime Minister Winston Churchill and his war cabinet before the cabinet war rooms were completed. These silent, abandoned platforms are filled with the echoes of the past, holding old posters and decaying signage. A secret, subterranean museum of the city's history that most passengers speed past without a second thought. The art and design of the Underground have had an influence that extends far beyond London. The Johnston typeface, with its clean, humanist sans serif letters, became a model for modern typography, influencing countless other fonts designed for clarity and public information. Harry Beck's schematic map was a revolutionary idea that has been copied by transit systems all over the world, from New York to Tokyo. The Underground proved that public utility could also be a patron of great design. The commitment to a unified, aesthetically pleasing, and user-friendly system created a brand that was not just functional, but also beloved. It showed that good design could improve the daily lives of millions of people in a tangible way. This system is also a marvel of continuous, incremental engineering. It is a 150-year-old system that is constantly being updated, repaired, and expanded. The challenge of keeping this aging and incredibly complex network running safely and efficiently is a monumental task that happens largely out of sight. Every night, after the last train runs, an army of engineers and maintenance workers, known as the fluffers, descends into the tunnels to clean, inspect, and repair the tracks. It's a nightly ritual of renewal that allows the city to wake up and move again the next morning. The Underground is a living, breathing machine, a testament to generations of workers who have built, maintained, and improved it, often in difficult and dangerous conditions. The first thing that hits you is the wall of sound and smoke. The air inside the Speakeasy is dense, a fog of cigarette and cigar smoke so thick it seems to muffle the outside world entirely, cocooning you in this secret little universe. Ultimately, the story of the tube is about connection. It connects disparate parts of a vast city, turning it into a single, cohesive whole. It connects people to their jobs, their homes, and each other. It connects the present to the past, allowing a modern commuter to travel through tunnels dug by Victorian navvies. It is a physical manifestation of the city's nervous system, a web of pathways that allows for the flow of people and ideas. It is a constant, reassuring presence in the life of London, a symbol of the city's resilience, ingenuity, and its perpetual motion. It is a story written in clay, iron, and electricity, a story that continues to unfold with every train that rumbles through the dark. And so we come back to that simple cup of coffee. Its journey from a luxury item to an everyday necessity is a story of globalization. The spread of coffee is inextricably linked to the history of trade, empire, and colonialism. The European powers that smuggled the plants out of Arabia and established vast plantations in their colonies were creating a global supply chain that would reshape economies and societies. The demand for coffee in the cafes of Paris and London had a direct and often brutal impact on the lives of people thousands of miles away. It's a reminder that the everyday products we consume are often the endpoint of a long and complex historical process, one that is not always pretty. The coffee house itself is a fascinating social invention. Before coffee houses, the primary public gathering places in Europe were taverns, which revolved around alcohol and its intoxicating effects. The coffee house offered a different kind of stimulation, mental alertness. This seemingly small shift had profound consequences. The coffee house became the crucible of the Enlightenment, a place where the scientific revolution and new political philosophies could be debated and disseminated. It fostered a culture of news, debate, and rational inquiry. It's not an exaggeration to say that modern ideas about democracy, finance, and science were nurtured and refined in the smoky, caffeinated atmosphere of 17th and 18th century coffee houses. The drink didn't just wake people up, it woke up the modern mind. The story of coffee is also a story of constant innovation. From the simple act of roasting beans over a fire to the development of complex, high-pressure espresso machines, humans have been endlessly creative in their quest to extract the perfect flavor from the coffee bean. The evolution of brewing methods reflects our changing tastes and lifestyles. The slow, ritualistic process of making Turkish coffee, the efficiency of the American drip coffee maker, the theatricality of the siphon brewer, the precision of the third-wave pour-over. Each method tells a story about the culture that created it. The pursuit of the perfect cup of coffee is a surprisingly deep and varied field of human endeavor. In the end, the history of coffee is a deeply personal one. For billions of people, it is a non-negotiable part of the morning ritual, a quiet moment of preparation for the day ahead. It is a catalyst for social interaction, the foundation of the "let's grab a coffee" invitation. It is a source of comfort, a warm, familiar presence in our lives. This small, roasted bean, has woven itself into the fabric of our daily routines and our global culture in a way that few other products have. Its story, from a mythical discovery in the hills of Ethiopia to the cup that may be sitting on your nightstand, is a rich and fascinating journey. It's a comforting thought that even in a simple cup of coffee, you can taste the whole world. Reflecting once more on that odd skirmish in the Australian outback, there's a certain poetry to the emus. Tactics. Ornithologists have noted that emus do, in fact, have a sort of guerrilla-like social structure when threatened. While one emu might be a designated leader of a flock, they break into small, chaotic groups to confuse predators, making it difficult to target any single individual. The soldiers of the Royal Australian Artillery, trained for trench warfare and organized battle lines, were simply unprepared for an enemy that practiced what could be described as a form of natural, instinctual insurgency. They were fighting an enemy that didn't have a command structure to break, or a front line to assault. They were fighting a decentralized, fluid network of very fast, very tough birds. The failure was a failure of imagination as much as of execution. The media's role in the Great Emu War is also a fascinating aspect of the story. The presence of a Fox movie-tone newsreel cinematographer suggests that this was intended to be a propaganda victory from the start. The government likely imagined heroic footage of Australian soldiers efficiently and cleanly dispatching a national pest, reinforcing the image of a capable, modern state taming the wild frontier. Instead, the press coverage turned the event into a national joke. The story's rapid transformation from a serious military operation into a source of public ridicule highlights the power of the media to shape narratives. The Way, War, became a story not about pest control, but about military incompetence, a narrative that has stuck for nearly a century, far outlasting the memory of the actual agricultural problem. There was also a quiet environmental lesson embedded in the story. The emu plague was, in part, a problem of humanity's own making. The development of agriculture in Western Australia, with its newly created water sources and vast fields of wheat, had inadvertently created a paradise for the emu population. The birds were not invading so much as they were taking advantage of a new and abundant resource that had been placed directly in their migratory path. The conflict arose from a clash between human land use and ancient patterns of animal behavior. The ultimate solution, fencing, was an admission of this, an attempt to physically separate these two conflicting worlds rather than trying to eliminate one of them. It was a move towards coexistence, albeit a heavily managed one. Now, let's dive deeper into the world of Hedy Lamarr's collaborator, George Antheil. He was a fascinating and eccentric figure in his own right, known as the bad boy of music. He was an American avant-garde composer who spent much of the 1920s in Paris, hobnobbing with artists like James Joyce and Pablo Picasso. His most famous work was the Ballet Mécanique, a bewilderingly complex piece composed for 16 synchronized player pianos, 2 airplane propellers, sirens, and electric bells. It was his deep, practical knowledge of how to synchronize multiple player pianos, a skill considered utterly niche and bizarre at the time, that made him the perfect partner for Lamarr. Their invention was a true marriage of her conceptual insight and his unique, mechanical expertise. It's a beautiful example of how artistic and scientific creativity can be two sides of the same coin. Consider the patent itself. When Hedy Lamarr and George Antheil submitted their design, it described a system using a paper roll with 88 rows of perforations, corresponding to the 88 keys on a piano. This paper roll would control the hopping between 88 different radio frequencies. It was a direct, mechanical translation of a musical idea into a cryptographic one. The sheer elegance and creativity of the concept is stunning. It used a low-tech, readily available technology, the player piano mechanism, to solve a high-tech problem. The Navy's dismissal of the idea as too bulky or unwieldy for a torpedo perhaps missed the point. The core concept of synchronized frequency hopping was the real treasure, not necessarily the specific piano roll implementation, which could have been miniaturized or adapted. They dismissed the genius because they were too focused on the quirky packaging.